I'm refusing to go on a family vacation because my sister expects me to look after her kids again. I even had to move out of my parents' house earlier because I was constantly being pulled into babysitting my 3 nieces and nephews. Despite that, last year I still ended up acting like a helper or even the main nanny during our family trip. For example, last summer we went to the beach. My parents paid for my hotel, but I had to share a room with 3 loud boys because my sister and her husband wanted their own space. I was promised I'd have time for myself, but instead I spent almost all my free time taking care of the kids. When I complained, everyone reminded me that I wasn't paying for the trip. In the end, we only did one thing I actually wanted, visiting an art gallery. I enjoy that kind of thing on vacation, but the kids were bored. This year, my parents planned another similar trip in June and expected everything to be the same. I refused. I told them I would drive separately and pay for my own hotel so I could have my own space. They were surprised and brought up the cost, but I explained that I have a stable job and can afford it. That led to arguments, but I explained my reasons clearly. I want to enjoy a vacation like an adult, not spend it like a babysitter. My parents told my sister, and she immediately called me, yelling that I would ruin everything if I didn't help her with the kids. I finally snapped and reminded her how last year I was dragged into her chaos, barely able to do anything for myself, and even made to feel guilty for wanting something simple like visiting an art gallery. I told her I deserve a proper vacation too. Now she refuses to talk to me, and my parents are still trying to convince me to go along just to avoid conflict. I'm standing my ground, even though the pressure is growing. I understand it won't be easy for them without help, but I don't think I'm wrong for setting boundaries. Let me know what you think. Am I right, or is my sister justified since she has 3 kids to take care of? Update 1. About an hour after I posted, my sister somehow found it. She wasn't just angry at me, she was upset that people in the comments didn't support her. She had a meltdown talking about how hard it is to raise triplets and insisting that I, as someone young and independent, should help her. I didn't change my position, and now I'm expecting a call from my parents since she already reached out to them. Update 2. After work, I can add more details. Things have mostly settled now. My parents saw my post and were shocked by how many people responded. Yes, they were upset that I posted it, but I told them if they had listened to me earlier, it wouldn't have been necessary. I was tired of always being the one expected to sacrifice for family peace. Eventually, my parents confronted my sister. The trip was canceled anyway since nothing had been booked yet, but now they're arguing with her. She blames me, and the kids are disappointed because they won't go to the beach. She even called me during lunch and implied that I don't have my own life, so I should help her. I recorded that conversation and showed it to my parents, which made them even more upset with her. A few days later, they told me they would never force me to babysit again and admitted that last year's situation was unfair. Now they're angry at my sister for saying I should help just because I have no life. Meanwhile, her husband has stepped back from the chaos and spends most of his time at work. Update 3. My parents have apologized, but my sister hasn't yet. At least as of a week ago, she refused. This whole situation basically exposed deeper issues in our family. For context, my parents and sister got used to me helping with her triplets. I lived with my parents until I was 22 to save money during college. I had a scholarship, but staying at home made things easier, and I'm grateful for that. But after graduating, everyone assumed I had unlimited free time. That's when they convinced me to go on that family trip. During that trip, I was responsible for 3 6-year-old boys and even had to share a room with them. They didn't listen to me at all. I even had to call their mom multiple times just to get them to behave. Yet, whenever I wanted to do something for myself, I was treated like the problem. If my plans didn't match the rest of the family, they were ignored. It felt completely unfair. I was part of the family, but my opinion didn't matter. After that trip, I spoke honestly with my parents, and they admitted they were wrong. By the end of the summer, I moved out without telling anyone in advance. I had already secured a good job after an internship, and moving closer to work reduced my commute significantly. My sister was especially unhappy because she lost her regular free babysitter, but she still tried to pressure me into helping. Sometimes I gave in when she offered things like pizza, and it became expected. When my parents suggested another trip to the same place, I immediately recognized it would be the same situation again. If I accepted their offer to pay, I'd be stuck babysitting. So I told them calmly I would go independently and pay for myself. That's when everything escalated. My parents started pleading, and my sister tried to pressure me emotionally, but I refused. After I posted about it, my family initially turned against me. My parents even called me while reading my post. I asked them if anything I wrote was untrue. They tried to say it was exaggerated, but I pointed out specific details that proved otherwise. I told them to look at the comments, even though there were too many to read fully. The number kept growing quickly, which shocked them and made them reconsider their actions. My sister also tried calling me repeatedly during work. I finally answered at lunch. She complained that my post turned her parents against me. After their argument, my parents canceled the trip. At first, they tried to blame me for it, but later they admitted their mistake. They acknowledged it wasn't fair to treat me like free childcare, especially since I no longer lived with them. They also tried to justify things by reminding me I lived with them for free during college, but I pointed out that wasn't a valid argument. When my sister finally spoke to me, she revealed her mindset clearly, saying I had no life and should spend my weekends helping her because she was too tired to manage everything. She's a stay-at-home mom, her husband earns well, and they live comfortably, but her kids are not my responsibility. She got angry and hung up. I had recorded the call and later showed it to my parents, which made them even more upset with her. A few days later, her husband stepped in and made her apologize. It was clear he hadn't realized the full situation before. He even believed she had been paying me for babysitting after I moved out. In reality, she barely covered anything, sometimes just gave money for pizza. It turned out she hadn't paid me properly for months. When this came up, her husband was furious, and she had to pay me everything she owed from her savings. After that, he apologized to me for not stepping in earlier and said they would hire a proper babysitter from now on. A few days later, we had a family meeting at my parents' house. Everyone apologized to me again. After that, my parents confirmed that the family vacation was still happening. And yes, I'm still going on my own terms, driving separately and paying for my own hotel room. I made it clear that if my sister even tries to push childcare onto me again, I'll switch hotels. I told her directly, and she promised it wouldn't happen. So, if there's no update a month after the trip, it means everything went fine. Update 4. My sister called me demanding that I delete my posts. She had realized how widely the story had spread and couldn't handle the backlash anymore. She asked if people were still commenting, and I told her honestly, yes, around 10 new comments a day, and most of them are criticizing her. She broke down crying and begged me to take everything down. I refused. I told her those posts are the only reason she can't treat me like garbage anymore. She acted like my entire life should revolve around hers. She didn't even properly pay me for babysitting, kept money for herself, and turned me into a full-time nanny during last year's vacation. It's no surprise people reacted negatively. When I mentioned I had even made a video about the situation, she completely lost it and hung up. Later, my parents called, asking me to delete the posts too. I refused again and explained that none of this would have happened if they had supported me earlier. I told them clearly, I'm not her servant, nanny, or handyman. I'm her brother, and I'm an adult. Eventually, they backed off, but still asked me to remove everything. I told them I wouldn't unless they started standing up for me more often. My sister created this situation with her entitlement, and now she has to deal with it. I also made it clear I have my own life, my career, and I want to move forward. If they keep enabling her, it will only make things worse. The only way to stop this is to end the entire situation. My posts are anonymous, and I have every right to speak about what happened.
My mom ended up crying, my dad stayed quiet, and I told them their emotions wouldn't change my decision. They know what needs to be done. Stop supporting her behavior. Soon after, my sister called again, furious because our parents told her they wouldn't step in anymore and that she had to handle things herself. They also told her to treat me better. I responded sarcastically, and when I hung up, she was crying again. Later, her husband called me to hear my side. He wasn't happy that I kept posting, but after I explained everything, he said he would talk to her again. Hopefully, that would calm things down. The vacation was still planned for the end of June. I had already booked my room on a completely different floor, far from my family. I made it clear, unless it was a planned family activity, I would spend my time however I wanted, visiting galleries, trying local food, and actually enjoying myself. The trip itself had ups and downs. The good part, my parents no longer tried to push me into babysitting. My sister did try, though. She even attempted to find out which room I was staying in, but failed. Before arriving, I had already informed the hotel staff not to give out any information about me. They confirmed it. At the day of departure, I left earlier than everyone else. I knew they wouldn't be ready on time, so I left at 9 a.m., even though check-in was later. My parents were annoyed because they had planned a group breakfast, but I told them I hadn't been informed. At the hotel, I double-checked with the staff about my privacy. Later, I found out my family had indeed tried to get my room number, but the staff refused. My sister tried to pressure them, but her husband stopped her. When we met later, everything seemed normal. At one point during an outing, my sister asked me to watch the kids. I immediately refused. I knew her trick. Just a minute would turn into an hour. Her husband backed me up and told her to stop. She started crying, saying she needed a break, but he reminded her he was tired too. My mom gave me a look, so I went up to her and said clearly if she expected me to babysit, I would leave the vacation immediately. That ended the discussion. After that, neither my mom nor my sister tried again. At the hotel, I avoided sharing elevators and kept distance. My room was far away, and I made sure no one followed me. The next day, I spent most of my time alone, only joining them for specific plans, like visiting the aquarium. Everything stayed calm. Later, my sister confronted me, saying I had ruined her vacation because now she still had to deal with her kids. I told her directly, I'm not her solution anymore, and she needs to handle her own life. She followed me, yelling, but I ignored her. At dinner, I told everyone she had been trying to track me down. She got scolded like a child. I made it clear those days were over. By the last day, everything was peaceful. No pressure, no manipulation. I still spend some time with my nephews. I'm not heartless. I even bought them small souvenirs. Overall, I consider the trip a success. My family finally understood that I'm not someone they can use anymore. Update 6. My mom and my sister saw my latest post and completely lost it again. My sister called, crying, saying I made her look like a bad mother. I told her if the behavior fits, then that's the reality. She couldn't point out anything false in my story. Then my mom came to my house demanding I delete everything. I refused again. She left in tears. Later, I spoke with my parents and I told them clearly their behavior created this situation. I'm not going back to how things were. They told my sister to leave me alone. She threw another tantrum, but her husband stepped in. My parents now insist she needs therapy. Update 7. I had a long conversation with my parents, and we agreed to keep some distance for now. I also spoke with my brother-in-law, and we settled things. He admitted the situation went too far and said my sister needs professional help. They're now looking for a therapist. He also apologized for not stepping in earlier and said they've already hired a proper babysitter. We both agreed it was a difficult situation that needed to end. And one last thing, thanks to all this, I actually started dating. A girl I liked recognized my story and had been waiting for me to make a move. Today is our first date. This is the final update.
I ruined my ex-boyfriend's life over 20 years ago, and I just made sure it stays that way. When I was in college in the 90s, I met Jake through mutual friends. He was 23 at the time. He had already graduated and was planning to move across the country to pursue graduate school. I was also planning a move, with friends, to a city just an hour and a half away from where he was going. We had a lot in common. We fell in love, and it felt like fate. Both of us planning to move 4,000 kilometers, and almost to the same place. Jake had 2 sisters and a younger brother. They were all great people, and I got along with them right away. Since Jake was in grad school and I was working, I usually visited him on weekends. He rented a house with 2 roommates from his program. We were young, didn't have much money, but we had fun. We went on cheap dates and spent a lot of time at home. Jake bred and sold small animals. It was part of his studies. He was studying animal science, so being surrounded by animals was normal for him, and honestly, I didn't mind it. I met the wife of his academic advisor, Mary. She was around 50 and worked in the university administration. A wonderful woman. We often had lunch together when I visited. In fact, I connected with people from his program even more easily than he did. But about 2 years into the relationship, something strange happened. One day we were lying in bed at his place, partially undressed, and he suddenly said that he was bothered by the fact that I had gained weight, and that it was becoming harder for him to feel attracted to me. Not a word about health, just that he found me less attractive. I sat up and calmly replied, "Maybe you should make sure I have proper food when I visit you, instead of just crackers and cheese." I had gained maybe 4 kilograms since we met. I wore the same clothing size, and even at 23, I wasn't going to tolerate that kind of nonsense. I didn't argue. It was his problem, not mine. So I just asked, "So what's your solution?" He looked me blankly and said, "I think you should try to lose weight." I replied, "No, I'm not going to do that. So what are you going to do?" He said, "Probably nothing. I just wanted to tell you how I feel." "Great, thanks." I got dressed, went to sleep, and left the next day like usual. We kept dating. But about 3 months later, he called and said he wanted to break up after nearly 3 years together. The reason? And I quote, "You're not scientific enough." I thought, what kind of nonsense is that? He seriously claimed that he couldn't talk to me about his work without using scientific animal terminology. I said, "That's ridiculous. What's the real reason?" But he insisted that was the reason. A month later, he came to return my things, and I made him tell the truth. Eventually, he gave in. It turned out he had been seeing one of his students. Let's call her Mac. She was 19, he was 26, and he was her instructor. I exploded. I yelled at him to get out. My roommate even threatened to throw him off the 2nd floor if he didn't leave, and he left. As soon as the door closed behind him, I broke down, from rage to hysterical laughter. I had seen Mac before, and suddenly it all clicked. At a barbecue at his place once, she had spilled something on her pants. Jake asked if I could lend her a pair of sweatpants. I couldn't. I wore a size 44-46, and she was significantly bigger. And suddenly everything made sense. His comment about my weight was never about me. He just wanted me to break up with him, because he was a coward. He liked a completely different type of girl, but didn't have the courage to say it. But you know what really got to me? He said it at night, when I was 150 kilometers from home, after we had been intimate. Did he really think I would just snap, turn around, and drive home in the middle of the night? After that, I messaged his roommates. I thanked them for everything and told them we had broken up.
and they already knew. They said they had demanded he tell me the truth, otherwise they would have told me themselves. That's why he came up with that nonsense about me not being scientific enough. One of the roommates, George, was a very sweet and attractive guy. He offered to bring my things over and said, "Come over this weekend. We'll have some drinks, relax." The kind of thing Jake never wanted to spend money on. I agreed. I came over. Jake wasn't home. George let me in, and that's when things got interesting. I started taking photos of all his animals because I knew one important thing. He had an animal that was on the endangered species list, and you couldn't legally keep it without a permit. All he had to do was file paperwork and pay $25, but he always said, "I don't want the government in my business." I photographed everything, the conditions, the cages, and another animal that was completely illegal to keep in that state. It was right by the window, visible from the street. Then George and I went into town. We got back around midnight, and we made sure Jake and Max saw us. Me in a short dress, a little drunk, George almost carrying me. We were loud on purpose, laughing, joking, even pretending there was something going on between us so they could hear. I spent the night in George's room. He behaved like a gentleman, but a few times walked out into the hallway just in his boxers. Pure coincidence, of course. In the morning, as I was leaving, Jake said, "You don't have to act like a..." I slowly ate a donut in a wrinkled dress with messy hair. George kissed me on the top of my head. Max sat there not knowing where to look. I smiled and said, "Enjoy my leftovers," and left. At the time, I thought that was my revenge. But no, that was just the beginning. The next day, I developed the film. Yes, the good old days, and immediately called the Department of Natural Resources. I reported everything, the animals, the conditions, the overcrowding, and especially the two that were illegal to keep in that state. I simply asked how to properly file a report, and then I did.
I destroyed my ex-boyfriend's life more than 20 years ago, and I just made sure it stays that way. As it turned out, Jake wasn't liked, not by his classmates, not even by his own roommates. But me? People liked me. George and another roommate decided to take things further. They filed a complaint with the university about a teaching assistant who was sleeping with his student and giving her preferential treatment. That same night we went bar hopping. They told the story to everyone they knew. The program was small, and the news spread fast. I made another move, too. I called Mary, his advisor's wife, and I told her directly he admitted himself that he's sleeping with a student. I even had his emails where he confirmed it. I sent them to her. Mary was furious. She immediately passed everything to her husband, Jake's advisor. And then it all started. A couple of weeks later, George calls me, emotional. "They're here, inspectors. They're taking the animals." Mac was at home, and trying to save the situation, she said, "All the animals belong to Jake." That automatically cleared the roommates of responsibility. The inspectors knew exactly where to look. They were tipped off about the back window, where the most problematic animal was, the one that was almost never legal to keep. Since George was on the lease, he had the right to let them in. All the animals were kept in shared spaces. The inspectors worked for several hours. Then they came back with a warrant. They took all the animals and searched Jake's room. The only thing they left were a few guppies in a tank. Now, the most painful part for him. Graduate students live off grants, and he had just received a federal grant around the time we broke up. I called them and simply asked,
How do I report that someone with a federal grant is under investigation for illegal animal possession? The result? He lost the grant and had to pay back nearly $30,000. He will never be able to get federal funding again. He wasn't jailed. The animals were in decent condition. But he lost all his animals, paid about $15,000 in fines. 2 animals were transferred to a wildlife center. The university didn't stay out of it either. He lost his stipend, was fired from teaching, essentially had his academic career destroyed. And all because of one thing. He was sleeping with a student. He couldn't even wait 4 weeks until the end of the course when it would have been technically allowed. His arrogance destroyed him. A few months later, I wrote to his sisters, told them I missed them. They replied and told me he had lied to the family, said I broke up with him because of distance. I just forwarded him his own email where he said he had fallen in love with Mac. And that settled everything. I moved on, finished my studies, built a career. And you know what I do now? I help scientists and doctors explain complex things in simple terms. Ironic, right? And him? He married Mac, 2 kids, went back to breeding animals. 20 years passed, and one day I'm giving a lecture at a university, 250 people in the room. And suddenly I hear, "Hey, long time no see." I turn around. It's him, Jake. I pretended I didn't recognize him. "Sorry, do I know you?" He said, "It's me, Jake." I paused and said, I guess my memory just erased you," and walked away. Later, I found out he was there for a job interview for a teaching position. They were seriously considering hiring him. And then I said just one sentence. "It's strange he's still teaching after what happened at University X." That was enough. They checked and found everything. The scandal with the student, the lost grant, the investigation, the old complaints. And you know what? He didn't get the job. Karma. Sometimes it works perfectly. And my conclusion? If the person who's supposed to love you humiliates you because of your appearance, the problem isn't you. The problem is them.
I let my sister-in-law throw her baby shower at my house, but then she tried to kick me out of my own home during the party just to impress one of her wealthy friends. I told her husband what happened, and that ended up leading to their divorce. Now she's raising the baby alone. I'm 32, married for 3 years. My husband, 35, and I have been together for 5 years, but he's currently working out of town, so we're basically in a long-distance situation. He comes home every other weekend. We recently bought a beautiful new house right next to my parents' place, so it's convenient for all of us. It's pretty big for just me, but I love the space. At our housewarming, everyone complimented it, especially my sister-in-law, Carrie, 32. She couldn't stop gushing about it. Carrie and I aren't super close, but we've always gotten along. A couple weeks ago, she asked if she could have her baby shower at my house. I agreed without hesitation. She was pregnant, I didn't want to be rude, and honestly, I thought it might be nice to socialize a bit, since I spend a lot of time alone. She said she didn't want to waste money renting a venue when I had such a perfect home for it. Her own house is fine, but smaller and not as impressive. I took her compliments at face value and agreed. For 2 weeks, she came over almost every day to plan things. I even took a day off work to help her. I work in finance, definitely not in event planning, but she kept treating me like her personal party coordinator. Still, I didn't mind because I thought this would bring us closer. I was wrong. On the day of the shower, I spent hours helping the decorators set everything up. Carrie arrived early, thanked me, acted totally normal. Then 15 minutes before guests were supposed to arrive, she looked at me and asked, "So where are you planning to spend the next couple of hours?" I was stunned. At first, I thought she was joking. I mean, it's my house. I was dressed for the event, had bought her a gift, and had been involved in planning everything. I asked if she was serious, and she calmly explained that I wasn't on the guest list. Apparently, she never intended for me to be there. She claimed she thought I was just helping out, like some kind of hired planner. She told me the shower was for close family and friends only, and that unfortunately, I didn't make the cut. She even asked me to leave before her guests arrived so I wouldn't cause a scene. I was furious, humiliated, and honestly heartbroken. I stormed outside to call my husband, but he was busy at work and couldn't pick up. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I decided to call Carrie's husband, Jim, 33. I don't know him well. He's quiet and reserved, but I told him everything. How I'd let her use my house, help plan the whole thing, and then how she tried to kick me out of my own home for her little exclusive party. He was silent for a long time after listening. I apologized for dumping all this on him, but I couldn't keep it in. I was so hurt. Jim finally said, very calmly, that I had nothing to apologize for, and that under no circumstances should I be leaving my own house. It would have been ridiculous for me to leave, and Jim told me he was on his way over. He didn't want things to escalate between me and Carrie, and he didn't want her getting worked up while pregnant. That sounded reasonable, so I waited. 15 minutes later, before any of her guests arrived, Jim showed up. Carrie looked like she'd seen a ghost when he walked in. As soon as I heard the doorbell, I went back inside. We all stood in the living room, and Jim calmly but firmly told me I was absolutely welcome to stay for the shower. This was my house after all. Carrie tried to argue, but he gave her a sharp look, and she went silent. She spent the whole evening glaring at me like she wanted me to vanish. I kept my cool and carried myself with dignity, but I quietly decided right then I was done with her. I even thought about canceling the whole event out of spite, but I had put too much time and effort into helping set it up. So I endured the evening and promised myself I'd never deal with Carrie again. After the shower ended, Jim apologized again for her behavior. Carrie didn't even look at me. He actually apologized for that too, saying she had no right to treat me that way. She was clearly bitter and thought I had forced myself into her special day, which was honestly insulting given it was happening under my own roof. Later that night, I told my husband everything. He was furious and wanted to call his sister immediately, but I asked him not to, at least not that night. I just wanted peace. But peace didn't last. The very next morning, my in-laws called me fuming. Apparently, when Carrie and Jim got home, they had a huge blowout fight because Jim knew what she'd done to me. Now, Jim had packed up and said he was done. He stopped speaking to Carrie entirely and even cut off communication with my in-laws. That shocked everyone, since Jim had always been close to her family. Their parents had even been old family friends. But suddenly, his side of the family blocked Carrie's parents everywhere. Social media, phone, everything. And yet, somehow, this was all my fault. According to Carrie and my in-laws, if I just kept quiet and gone along with her plan, none of this would have happened. They actually blamed me for ruining her marriage. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Carrie humiliated me in my house, and I was the one being painted as the villain? I lost it. I told them straight up, I am not taking the blame for any of this. Carrie behaved horribly. I generously allowed her to host an event at my home for free, and in return, she tried to humiliate me by kicking me out of my own house, all because she didn't think I was close enough family. Excuse me, I'm literally her brother's wife. I reminded them that if my husband had been home, Carrie never would have dared to treat me that way. And I don't regret telling Jim the truth. He was the only reasonable adult in this mess. If he decided enough was enough and chose to walk away from his marriage, I trust his judgment. That's his choice, and it's not on me. But my in-laws won't stop harassing me. They keep saying I've ruined a family, and Carrie's baby will grow up without a father because of me. Honestly, that's just emotional blackmail. I'm close to blocking them completely, but the only reason I haven't is because sometimes their words do get in my head. They make me doubt myself, even though I know deep down I didn't do anything wrong. My husband, thankfully, is fully on my side. He told me I did nothing wrong, and he'll be the one to explain to his parents that Carrie caused this, not me.
He says they should be supporting her instead of attacking me. But I'm just exhausted. I don't feel guilty at all, but they won't leave me alone, and all I want is for this drama to finally be over. Honestly, I still don't even understand why it mattered so much to Carrie that I wasn't at her baby shower. It never made sense to me. So, was I really wrong for telling her husband the truth about how badly she treated me? You can make up your own minds, but personally, I think I did the right thing. I don't see any reason why I should be the scapegoat here. Yes, it's tragic if their baby ends up growing up without a father, but if they couldn't fix their marriage anyway, that outcome was inevitable sooner or later. And let's be real, Carrie had zero interest in resolving things. If she had been willing to apologize, maybe there would have been a chance to work things out. Instead, she doubled down and pushed all the blame on me. That's just insane.
Update 1. Hi again. It's been almost a week since the baby shower, and Carrie and Jim are officially getting divorced. This isn't speculation. Jim already announced it on his socials. I didn't think things would unravel this quickly, but apparently he's already filed and the process has started. He moved back in with his parents, and they've been living apart ever since. I wasn't sure if I should even reach out because I honestly felt guilty, but after talking with my husband, we agreed that someone from the family should at least check in, especially since Jim hadn't blocked us. Clearly, he left that door open for a reason, so I sent him a message, just saying I was sorry that things had turned out this way. Not an apology for causing it, more like expressing sympathy. He actually reassured me, told me not to blame myself because their marriage had been hanging by a thread for a long time. After that, I asked him directly, why did Carrie hate the idea of me being there so much? Because the only close relatives excuse never added up. She'd invited plenty of people who weren't even family, people I knew she wasn't close with. So what was the real reason? Well, he told me, and wow. The truth was, Carrie had been desperate to impress one particular guest, an old school friend of hers who'd married into a very wealthy family. Carrie's been planning to start a business after the baby, and she was hoping this woman's wealthy husband might invest in it. Her entire baby shower plan was basically a performance for this one guest. And here's the kicker. She wanted to pretend my house was hers. That's why she didn't want me around. She thought she could host the event, claim the house was hers, and put on this illusion of being more successful than she really is. Obviously, she couldn't pull that off with me standing right there. As it turned out, that important friend didn't even show up because she got sick that day. But the fact remains, Carrie was perfectly willing to lie, humiliate me, and use me just to keep up appearances. When Jim found out, he confronted her at home. She admitted it openly, like it was no big deal to fake an entire lifestyle just to impress someone from high school. Jim told her straight up she owed me an apology for treating me like trash after I'd been generous enough to host. She flat out refused, and that fight cracked open everything else. According to Jim, this wasn't new behavior. For the last couple of years, Carrie's been obsessed with pretending they're wealthier than they are, staging things for social media, putting on a front for acquaintances. He said it all started not long after their wedding, when some of her friends made snide comments about how modest their wedding was compared to others. Since then, she's been living in this fantasy of trying to look rich. Hearing this honestly blew my mind, but it also made everything click into place. Honestly, I think all those comments from her friends really got under Carrie's skin, but she's a grown woman, not a teenager. She shouldn't still be this obsessed with what other people think. Real friends don't mock you for not living a flashy lifestyle. If they do, maybe they're not worth keeping around. The thing is, Carrie and Jim aren't struggling at all. They live a perfectly normal, comfortable life. Sure, they're not wealthy, but they're fine. Jim works in real estate, and Carrie has a steady job at a marketing firm. She even had plans to launch her own business after the baby. If anything, she should have been saving up instead of spending recklessly. But Carrie's been fixated on projecting this glamorous image they simply can't afford. Jim said he tried countless times to explain to her that their life is good enough as it is, that they don't need to impress anyone. But she just brushed him off. Instead, she kept buying things without talking to him first, kept putting up a front. That put a constant strain on their marriage. He admitted he used to ignore it because he loved her so much, but with a baby on the way, he couldn't look past it anymore. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about the kind of future they'd be able to give their child. After the baby shower fight, Jim snapped. He told me even if I hadn't called him that day, he would have left sooner or later. The baby shower incident just sped things up. He doesn't blame me for anything, and honestly, I feel lighter knowing that. My husband and I talked it over too. He feels sorry for Carrie, of course, but he also thinks Jim wouldn't have walked away unless he'd thought it through. Jim was a good husband, and if he reached his breaking point, that says a lot. I do feel bad for Carrie, especially since she's pregnant, but at the end of the day, she dug herself into this. She's in her 30s, still acting like she's in high school, still letting shallow people dictate how she feels about her own life. She needs therapy more than she needs new designer bags. I honestly hope they figure something out, if only for their baby's sake, because growing up in a broken home is tough. For now, though, I'm stepping back. I've decided to block Carrie and my in-laws for the time being, not out of spite, but because I don't see anything good from staying involved. My husband agrees. We'll give them space and focus on our own lives. Update 2. So my husband just got back a couple of hours ago and he filled me in. He's been in touch with Jim these past few days, and apparently Jim is open to giving their marriage another shot, but only if Carrie is willing to apologize and agree to go to therapy. My husband's been trying to get that message across to her, but so far she hasn't responded. His parents said she's avoiding everyone right now, just isolating because she's so upset, which honestly is understandable, but the ball's in her court now. As for some of the comments on my last post, a lot of people called me selfish, saying my husband and I were greedy and should have been financially supporting Carrie and Jim. I honestly don't know how people came to that conclusion, but let me clear the air. We bought this house fair and square because we could afford it. If it hadn't been within our budget, we wouldn't have bought it. And for the record, Jim and Carrie are not broke. They have stable incomes. Acting like they need our charity is just insulting to them. Also, my husband and I are in a very similar financial situation to Jim and Carrie, so I don't understand why they'd need our help, or why anyone would think they do. It's a bit odd, but since some of you brought it up, I wanted to clarify. Some people didn't like that I said I hope they reconcile and stay together, claiming Jim deserves better. Maybe he does, but ultimately it's his choice. I don't get why so many people feel the need to pour hate here, call me names, or call Jim a pushover without even knowing him. They love each other, despite all their problems, and they're having a child together. That's a big deal. They can't just walk away from each other and move on, given the circumstances. So yes, I wanted and still want things to work out for them. That's all I wanted to say for now. Update 3. Hi everyone, it's been almost 3 weeks since my last post. I just wanted to share that Jim and Carrie have decided to reconcile and try to work things out. I'm really happy for them, even though Carrie and I still aren't talking. I found out from my husband that they've agreed to attend family therapy for a couple of months to see how things go. They'll still live separately for now, and when the baby arrives, they'll co-parent together for the first few months. If things go well, they plan to move back in together. I'm genuinely happy for them. I know this isn't what a lot of people wanted to hear. Many were hoping Jim would just leave her, but he's going to do what he thinks is right, and everyone else will have to respect that.
My husband secretly booked business class tickets for himself and his mother for our honeymoon, leaving me with a seat in economy class. So I exposed him right there in the airport lobby, in front of everyone. I'm 32 and my husband Van is 36. We got married recently. We had been together for 4 years and engaged for 8 months. I met him when I was 29. At the time, I worked as a bar manager, and he used to come in regularly as a customer. We started talking, and eventually he asked me out.
I turned him down at first, but he kept coming back to the bar, always finding excuses to chat with me. My coworkers joked that it was kind of sweet. Eventually, I decided to give him a chance, and from there, everything took off. Van is, in many ways, wonderful. He's affectionate, kind, emotionally mature, financially independent, and always plans our dates. The only issue I ever had was his mother, Naomi. Before anyone judges me, I want to explain. When I first met her, I actually liked her. Van was 13 when his parents divorced. His father, Matt, cheated on Naomi with a coworker. Naomi was completely devastated. They had been together since college, and she believed they would grow old together. Matt begged for forgiveness, saying he had never been with anyone else and that this was a stupid mistake caused by losing his head. But Naomi refused to forgive him and filed for divorce. What Matt did was awful, but Van was too young to fully understand what was happening. He was just heartbroken watching his family fall apart. He lived with his mother during the week to stay close to school and spent weekends with his father. Despite his mistake, Matt was a good father to Van. He supported him, attended every school event and sports game, showed up for parent-teacher meetings, and most importantly, allowed Van to be himself. Naomi, on the other hand, became extremely strict after the divorce. Van believes her behavior changed because of the betrayal. She became obsessively controlling. According to Van, he wasn't allowed to stay out late with friends, date girls, go on school trips or picnics, be near lakes or pools, sleep over at friends' houses. When he told me about these rules, they sounded ridiculous. Van explained that his mother justified everything by saying she was lonely without him and just wanted to protect him from the world. Unsurprisingly, Van quickly realized he felt much more comfortable living with his father. Matt's rules were simple. Don't stay out too late, and always share your location when going out with friends in case of emergencies. When school trips came up, Naomi would forbid Van from going, but Matt would sign the permission forms and encourage him to participate. This caused massive fights between Naomi and Matt, with Naomi threatening legal action. If Van wanted to hang out with friends, Naomi would say no, so he waited for weekends at his dad's place to finally have some freedom. As a teenager, he grew to hate living with his mother. They argued constantly. She criticized his clothes, his hair, and his friends. He spent most weekdays locked in his room, counting down the days until Friday, when he could escape to his dad's house. When Van was 17, Matt introduced him to his new partner, Heather. Heather is a kind woman who treated Van like her own son. She struggled with infertility and had accepted that she would never have children. Meeting Matt and learning he had a son was something she genuinely welcomed. Van adored her. She became a second mother to him. For Naomi, this was unacceptable. She couldn't tolerate another woman in her son's life. She caused endless scandals and tried to poison Van against Heather, claiming that Matt must have cheated with her during the marriage, which wasn't true. Heather entered Matt's life long after the divorce. Naomi refused to accept this reality and began making Matt's life difficult, even preventing him from seeing his son. When weekends came, Naomi would say Van couldn't go to his father because Heather was some unknown woman and she wouldn't allow her son to stay with strangers. The conflicts became uglier and uglier. When Van turned 18, he was accepted into 2 universities. Naomi pressured him to choose the one closest to her home so she could visit him every week. Van didn't like that university. It lacked proper programs in his field. He discussed it honestly with his father. Matt told him he should choose what was best for himself, regardless of Naomi's wishes. But Van was terrified of upsetting her. In the end, he chose the university farther away. Naomi exploded. She screamed that he was abandoning her, that all men were the same. She threatened to kick him out and said she wouldn't pay for his education unless he did what she wanted. Van called his father, and Matt immediately came to help him pack and move out. That was the last day Van lived with his mother.
Just to clarify, being someone's +1 meant that Van was expected to take his mother as his guest to various events, for example, company parties or work functions. From what I later understood, even when we traveled, she demanded that he constantly share his location, claiming it helped her sleep peacefully at night. All of this made me deeply uncomfortable. I could clearly see Van being torn apart between wanting a normal adult life and feeling obligated to take care of his emotionally unstable mother. He didn't want to meet all her demands, but he was terrified that she might do something extreme again. Unlike his mother, his father Matt was calm, grounded, and emotionally healthy. I had met Matt and his wife Heather many times, and they were always warm and welcoming. They never asked intrusive questions. Matt showed genuine interest in my life without ever trying to belittle me. I saw many of Matt's best qualities reflected in Van. That's probably why I stayed. I knew Van was more than the damage his mother had caused him. I understood that he needed therapy, and I gently encouraged him to seek it, but he always insisted that he was fine. When Van proposed to me, completely out of the blue, it became one of the happiest days of my life. He surprised me by bringing my parents and my best friend into town so they could be part of the moment. Matt and Heather were there too, congratulating us wholeheartedly. The only person missing was Naomi. Van said she wasn't feeling well. Honestly, I was relieved. I didn't want her saying something inappropriate in front of my parents. I knew they would instantly dislike her if she did. We were having a wonderful time when Van suddenly received a call from the hospital. His mother had fallen down the stairs. We all rushed there, but Naomi refused to see me or anyone else. She demanded that only Van be allowed into her room, so we waited outside. I found that strange. We were all there out of concern, but it didn't feel appropriate to say anything at the time. When Van came out, he said she would be fine. According to the doctor, she had a fracture and needed to stay overnight. Naomi wanted Van to stay with her. Matt immediately offered to stay instead, pointing out that she would be sleeping anyway and that Van should take me home. But Van refused. He said his mother wouldn't like that and he didn't want to upset her further. So we all went home. My parents and my friend helped me clean up afterward. Van booked them hotel rooms for the night, but they chose to stay with me instead. I think they could see how sad I was, that I wouldn't be spending the night with my fiancé on the very day he proposed. That should have been my first warning sign that things were only going to get worse. Wedding planning quickly turned into what Naomi wants. She interfered with my wedding dress, chose the flower girl, commented on Van's suit, controlled the guest list, the venue, almost every single detail. Van and I have long planned our honeymoon in Hawaii, but Naomi insisted that flying that far was unacceptable and that somewhere closer would be much better. That was when I finally tried to set a boundary. I told her calmly but firmly, no. Naomi was shocked and said it was disrespectful to speak to her that way. I replied honestly that the honeymoon was for Van and me, and the decision was ours. She immediately burst into tears, telling Van that I was excluding her, ignoring her, and pushing her out of his life. She accused me of trying to steal her son, which was absurd. I reminded her that I had already accepted her choice of officiant, venue, cake, and even the dresses for my bridesmaids. I had tried to accommodate her wishes wherever possible, but I would not allow her to dictate where we went on our honeymoon. Van was caught in the middle. He tried to talk to her, but she framed herself as a martyr, a mother sacrificing everything for her son. Later, I even sent her an apologetic message, knowing how much she meant to Van. Her reply chilled me. She said no woman would ever take her son away from her, and that I should know my place. I immediately showed the message to Van. He called his mother to confront her, but she accused me of trying to drive a wedge between them and insisted that he should always love and believe her more than me. I was deeply hurt. After the call, I told Van exactly how it made me feel. To his credit, he agreed. He reassured me that we would stick to our plan and go to Hawaii. I was relieved. It felt like Van was finally starting to set boundaries. I believed we could enjoy our honeymoon far away from her controlling presence. The wedding itself went smoothly, without major incidents. However, during the reception, my mother-in-law somehow managed to give a speech entirely about herself, emphasizing how much she had sacrificed in her life. It felt like a quiet attempt to reclaim attention even on our day. Still, I chose to focus on the positives. My parents, Matt, Heather, and our guests had a great time. We danced all night. I went to bed excited, knowing we were leaving for Hawaii the next day. On the morning of our honeymoon, I woke up in an amazing mood. Van and I headed to the airport, and I felt genuinely happy until we arrived. That's when I discovered that Van had booked himself a business class seat and me an economy seat. I was stunned. I would have happily paid for business class myself. Van had insisted on handling the travel arrangements, so I assumed we would be sitting together. When I asked him what was going on, he said he had found a great deal and upgraded his ticket, but there were no business class seats left for me. It didn't sit right with me. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He brushed it off, saying it wasn't a big deal, just a few hours. I told him that if it really didn't matter, then he could sit in economy while I took business class. He snapped. He accused me of being overly sensitive and said we'd see each other after landing. When I asked where he was going, he said he was heading to the business lounge. I was completely confused and hurt. I tried calling him, but he ignored every call. My suspicion grew stronger. Something felt very wrong. Then my phone rang. It was my mother-in-law. She never called me directly unless she couldn't reach Van. I answered, intending to tell her that Van would call her back soon. Instead, she started asking where exactly I was sitting in the airport, which cafe, which lounge. Already overwhelmed, I finally asked her what she wanted. After a brief pause, she mockingly told me not to lose my composure because she was also flying with us on our honeymoon. I completely lost it. I shouted, demanding to know what kind of sick joke this was. Naomi calmly explained that she wanted to stay close to her son and didn't want him flying so far away, so she had convinced him to bring her along. I hung up, furious, and marched straight to the business lounge. Security didn't want to let me in, but I told them my husband was inside and that I urgently needed to speak to him about his mother. After a long argument, they finally let me through, and that's when I saw Van, sitting comfortably, scrolling through his phone.
So his phone had been in his hands the entire time. He had been deliberately ignoring my calls. I walked up to him, and he looked up, clearly shocked to see me there with security. He asked what was going on, but I didn't waste time. I asked him directly if it was true that his mother was flying with us on our honeymoon. Van froze. I asked if that was the real reason he'd bought me a separate ticket, so I wouldn't find out that he was planning to spend our honeymoon with his mommy. His face turned bright red. People around us started staring. Even the security guard seemed invested in the scene. That was when my mother-in-law walked into the lounge, scanning the room for Van. When she saw us, she stopped dead in her tracks. I told Van that she herself had told me everything. That's when he started stumbling through excuses. He said that originally he had booked economy tickets for just the two of us, but Naomi had cried and begged him, and in an attempt to keep everyone happy, he brought separate tickets and tried to hide it from me. He claimed he had booked her a completely different hotel and that she wouldn't bother us. Naomi stepped in, as she always did. She said I should be grateful that her son loved her so much, and that it was no big deal if she came along. After all, she had never been so far away from her boy before. I was shaking with rage. If we hadn't been in an airport, I would have lost it completely. Instead, I raised my voice and told my husband that I was ashamed to be married to a child who couldn't go anywhere without his mother. I said he looked more like her husband than her son. Van whispered that I was embarrassing him in front of respectable people and that we could talk about it after landing. I laughed in his face.
I told him to enjoy his honeymoon with his mommy because I was done. Both of them stared at me in shock as I walked away. I tore my tickets in half and called a taxi home. Van ended up not flying either. He came home later and started yelling at me, saying I had no right to speak to me like that and that he was only trying to do the right thing. He said his mother flew alone because she didn't want to lose her ticket. I locked myself in the bathroom and cried. I couldn't even look at him. All of this happened yesterday, and ever since then I felt like I'm in a fog. I know with painful clarity that our marriage is over. He hasn't apologized. He barely speaks to me. And it hurts. Leaving a marriage is a massive step, especially when just 3 days ago I believed I would spend my entire life with him. That's why I came here. I needed to know if I was wrong for walking away after my husband tried to bring his mother on our honeymoon. Update 1. I'm overwhelmed by the support I received, hundreds of comments and private messages. When I wrote my post, I never expected so many strangers to care. After reading everything, I agree with those who said I needed to have one final, honest conversation with my husband. If he continues to side with his mother, I will have no choice but to end this marriage. I can't spend my entire life fighting this. Naomi clearly doesn't care about us, considering she still flew to Hawaii alone, fully aware that all of this chaos was caused by her. I'll update after we talk. Update 2. A month has passed since my last update, and a lot has happened. After the airport incident, I made a decision. The situation was unbearable, and I couldn't live in limbo without a real conversation. I packed my things and waited for Van to come home from work. That conversation would either save our marriage or destroy it. When Van walked in and saw me waiting, I saw surprise and fear flash across his face. I asked him to sit down and handed him a glass of water. The tension in the room was almost suffocating. We hadn't spoken since the incident because he still believed I owed him an apology. I took a deep breath and told him everything, how his mother had made me feel all this time. I explained how I saw him change whenever she was around, how he seemed to become a different person. I told him I understood the crushing guilt he carried over her past, over her sacrifices, and how she constantly used that guilt to control him, but it was slowly destroying the foundation of our relationship. I cried as I explained how deeply she had invaded my life, not just our wedding, but even our honeymoon. I told him I fell in love with his kindness and warmth, but his relationship with his mother was tearing apart everything we had built. When I finished, I saw tears streaming down his face. He admitted he had no idea I felt this way. He said he had spent his entire life caring for his mother, living in constant fear that something terrible might happen to her. He confessed that he had become so used to putting her needs above everyone else's that he no longer knew how to stop. He admitted he knew bringing her on the honeymoon was wrong, but she leaned on his guilt and he gave in, convincing himself it would somehow be better for everyone. I told him that if his mother truly cared about him, she wouldn't have flown to Hawaii alone and left him behind. He nodded and admitted he had been blind to her manipulation until now. He broke down completely, dropped to his knees, and apologized over and over again. My heart shattered. I hugged him, realizing how much internal pain he was carrying. It became clear that he needed therapy, and if he truly recognized his mistakes and was willing to work on them, I was willing to give this marriage a chance. Within the next 2 weeks, Van booked appointments and began seeing a therapist. He also had an honest conversation with his father.
Update 3. Matt had no idea how bad things had gotten and was genuinely shocked by how far Naomi had pushed everything. His father told him the same thing I had, that it was time for Van to stop living in constant anxiety over his mother and finally start living his own life, without excuses. With the help of his therapist, Van decided to move to low contact with his mother. He understood that he needed space to untangle his thoughts and emotions. It wasn't an easy decision. Naomi was calling him non-stop, as expected. He hasn't told her yet that he's seeing a therapist. He knows she'll completely lose it when she finds out. He plans to tell her this coming weekend and ask for space. If she refuses, he's prepared to block her entirely. Overall, I see this as real progress and a necessary step toward healing our relationship. I know the road ahead won't be easy, but for the first time, I feel like we're moving in the right direction. Update 4, 3 months later. It's been 3 months since my last update, and I want to thank everyone who followed my story and supported me. The past few months have been an emotional roller coaster, and the encouragement from this community meant more to me than I can express. First of all, Van did talk to his mother after working through things in therapy. As expected, it went terribly. She unleashed a torrent of accusations, screaming that I had stolen him from her. She demanded that he divorce me, insisting that I was the cause of all the problems and that everything had been perfect before I came into his life. But this time, Van finally stood his ground. He firmly told her that he would no longer tolerate her manipulation. He made it clear that she had to respect our marriage and our private life. Then he made a difficult but decisive choice. He blocked her number. I did the same. It was necessary for our mental health and for the survival of our relationship. Of course, Naomi began telling anyone who would listen that her son had abandoned her and that she had been treated horribly. Gossip and rumors reached us through relatives and mutual acquaintances, but we stayed focused on our own lives. Matt, Van's father, played an important role during this time. He checked in on Naomi occasionally to make sure she was safe and taking her medication. After cutting contact with his mother, Van's condition noticeably improved. The constant cloud of anxiety and guilt that had followed him for years finally lifted. We started going on dates again, uninterrupted by endless phone calls. We were finally able to just enjoy each other. As for our honeymoon, Van wanted to make things right. He surprised me with a trip to Hawaii. This time, we both flew business class, and we had the calm, romantic vacation we had originally dreamed of. It was a beautiful trip, one that helped us reconnect and create a positive memory where there had once been so much pain. Overall, I feel happy and optimistic about our future, despite everything we've been through. My husband's growth and the effort he's putting into our relationship are impossible to miss. If anything new happens, I'll be sure to post another update.
My husband's daughter from his first marriage tried to claim his house through a will, but court revealed the most terrifying truth. I'm 45 years old. I've been married to my husband, Michael, for 10 years now. He's 50. We were both in our early 30s when we first met at a local art gallery. We were standing in front of the same painting and started talking about it. It felt like instant connection, the kind where you feel like you've known someone your whole life. Michael asked me out, and the more time we spent together, the deeper that feeling became. I'm the oldest of 3 children. My family never had much money. We survived, but luxuries were rare. Fast food was something we only had on birthdays. Our father taught us early on that hard work was the only way forward. I studied relentlessly, worked my way into college on my own, and even modeled part-time to support myself. By graduation, I had no student debt. I kept climbing professionally and was working as a junior lawyer when Michael and I met. Michael's background was very different. His family was financially comfortable. His father had a well-paid position with strong benefits, so money was never a concern for them. His parents paid for his college, and thanks to his father's influence, Michael landed an internship at the same company. From there, he built his own career through genuine effort and dedication. Despite our different upbringings, we bonded deeply over a shared love of art and music. That's what brought us together. Michael has a daughter from his previous marriage, Candace. From the very beginning, she disliked me. She was distant, cold, and avoided conversations whenever we were in the same room. It felt like she blamed me for her parents' divorce, even though I met Michael long after it was finalized. I understood her pain and tried to give her time and space. For context, Michael and his ex-wife, Amelia, were married only 3 years. They met in college and married young. After the wedding, everything changed. Amelia stayed home while Michael worked long hours. One day, Michael returned early from a business trip and found Amelia in bed with his best friend, Tom. In a single moment, he he lost both his marriage and his closest friendship. Devastated, Michael filed for divorce. The process was brutal. Amelia fought aggressively to keep the house, even though it legally belonged to Michael. The conflict escalated into a bitter custody battle over Candace. Because of Amelia's infidelity, the court ruled against her claim to the house, but granted shared custody so Candace could maintain a relationship with both parents. Amelia never forgave losing the house. Over the years, she filled Candace's head with resentment toward her father. Michael chose not to tell his daughter about her mother's affair, trying to protect her from the truth. I learned all of this early in our relationship. Michael wanted complete honesty, and I respected that deeply. At one point, Michael invited Candace to join us on a trip to Africa, hoping it would help us bond. I truly believed it might change things. Unfortunately, it was a disaster. Candace was hostile the entire trip. She snapped at me constantly, had angry outbursts, and hurled insults whenever I got close to Michael. She called me a gold digger more than once. Michael scolded her, but she only smirked, making it clear she had no intention of accepting me. Despite everything, our love was strong. After a whirlwind romance, we got married. It was a small ceremony with close friends and family. Candace and Amelia were invited. Neither showed up. The first years of our marriage were wonderful. We traveled often and focused on our careers. I loved my job and had no intention of giving it up. Amelia moved in with Tom after the divorce. Candace lived in an apartment Michael had bought for her and worked as a social media manager at a reputable company. 3 years into our marriage, we welcomed our son, Nick. My pregnancy was difficult, and Candace made it worse. Whenever Michael wasn't around, she made cruel comments about my weight and appearance. She told me Michael would leave me because I was fat and disgusting now. It shattered me. When I finally told Michael, he immediately stopped allowing Candace to visit our home. From then on, they only met in public places to protect my well-being. After Nick was born, we were overjoyed. I chose to return to work after maternity leave, and we hired a nanny to help. Financially, we were comfortable, but my independence meant deeply to me. Candace's hostility only grew after Nick's birth. At family gatherings, she would criticize him, mock him, and intentionally upset him until he ran to us in tears. I could tolerate her hatred toward me, but not toward my child. I banned her from our home entirely, and we stopped hosting family events. As we grew older, Michael and I began thinking seriously about the future. We decided to draft wills to put everything in order. Michael had already bought Candace an apartment, so he named me and our son as beneficiaries of the family home. Candace would receive his savings, investments, and remaining assets. I had my own assets, which I planned to leave entirely to Nick. We both felt this was fair and ensured our son's stability. When Amelia and Candace found out about the will, all hell broke loose. I don't know who told them, maybe Michael, maybe his parents, but their reaction was explosive. Amelia called Michael, demanding the house, claiming she was his first wife and deserved it. Michael refused. He reminded her that he paid child support, covered Candace's education, bought her an apartment, and would continue supporting her, but the house was meant for his son. Furious, Amelia sent me a long message filled with insults and threats. I showed it to Michael. He told me not to respond and to block her immediately. The next day, Candace showed up at our door, visibly upset. I knew exactly why she was there. To avoid exposing Nick to conflict, I arranged for my parents to pick him up. Once we were alone, Candace made her demand clear. She insisted that Nick and I give up the house because as Michael's first child, she believed it was rightfully hers. Despite my anger, I stayed silent and let Michael speak. He calmly told her that he had always provided for her and always would.
Michael assured Candace that he intended to leave her his savings. However, he also had a responsibility toward me and our son. As his wife,
Securing the family home for us was his way of ensuring our safety and stability. Candace immediately shifted the blame onto me, claiming that I should be the one to do the right thing. I calmly stated that I fully supported my husband's decision, which only made her angrier. She raised her voice and threatened to take me to court. At that point, I had no desire to escalate the conflict and asked her to leave us alone. As expected, a few weeks later, I received a court summons. Candace and Amelia had filed a lawsuit against me over the property. The claim stated that I had married Michael for his money and manipulated him into leaving me the family home. Michael and I consulted our lawyer, who confidently told us that neither Candace nor Amelia had any solid legal standing. Still, despite his reassurance, I couldn't shake my anxiety, especially because I didn't want our son dragged into this mess. As the court date approached, the tension in our home became unbearable. In court, Amelia's lawyer was relentless. He tried to argue that Michael was obligated to prioritize his firstborn daughter above everyone else. They pushed for a full jury trial to determine ownership of the house. Because we lived in Colorado, a jury trial was indeed required, making everything far more complicated. The looming trial kept Michael and me under constant stress. Amelia's legal team played dirty, digging into our past, searching for anything they could twist against us. Our lawyer did his best, but the pressure was overwhelming. Then something completely unexpected happened. Tom, the same man Michael had caught Amelia cheating with years ago, contacted us and insisted on meeting. Michael had cut him out of his life entirely after the affair and didn't want to see him, but I convinced him to listen. I felt that maybe this could help resolve everything faster. When Tom arrived, we half expected it to be another scheme orchestrated by Amelia's lawyer. Instead, Tom came to confess something devastating. Michael sat frozen as Tom admitted that his affair with Amelia had lasted far longer than anyone knew. It had begun even before her pregnancy. I held my breath as Tom continued. When Amelia became pregnant, she told Tom she believed the child was actually his. However, because Michael was financially stable, she chose to hide the truth and remain married to him. Tom begged her to tell Michael the truth, but she refused every time. I was stunned. Amelia had carried this lie for decades, all while aggressively fighting for the house, knowing full well she was hiding something monstrous. Tom explained that he stayed silent because he believed Amelia loved him. But seeing the pain this lawsuit caused us finally made him realize who she really was. He broke down, crying, and begged Michael for forgiveness. Michael remained silent, completely shattered. I felt a mix of rage and heartbreak watching my husband, a man who had believed his entire life that Candace was his daughter, learn that it had all been built on a lie. I had tolerated Amelia's cruelty and Candace's insults for years in the hope of maintaining some semblance of peace, but now there was no point in staying quiet. I immediately contacted our lawyer and shared Tom's confession. He explained that for it to hold weight in court, we needed concrete evidence, a DNA test. So we invited Candace over for dinner under the pretense of reconciliation. The plan was simple: discreetly obtain a glass or utensil for testing. Candace agreed to come, though she behaved exactly as she had always had, rude, cruel, and demeaning toward both me and my son. She mocked us, confident that she and her mother would win the case and that I would soon lose everything. I stayed silent, hoping this would be the last time we ever had to endure her behavior. After she left, we immediately handed her cup to our lawyer. On the morning of the court hearing, we received confirmation. Tom had told the truth. Candace was not Michael's biological daughter. I felt a wave of relief, followed immediately by deep sorrow for my husband, who had been manipulated and deceived for so many years. I told our lawyer I was ready to testify. He agreed it was the best course of action. Standing before the jury, I felt a storm of emotions: anger at Amelia's deception, compassion for Michael, and fierce determination to protect my family. I answered every question honestly. I spoke about my background, my career, and how I had never depended on Michael financially. I described the years of emotional abuse, mockery, and humiliation I endured from Amelia and Candace. Screenshots were presented as evidence. I explained how Candace had refused to attend our wedding and later verbally attacked our son. Then I revealed Tom's confession to the jury, the truth about Candace's paternity and the secret Amelia had hidden for decades. Candace stared at me in disbelief, whispering urgently to her lawyer. Our attorney then presented the DNA test results, confirming everything I had said. I watched Amelia's face crumble as the truth finally caught up with her. Candace looked like her world was collapsing, just as ours had when we learned the truth. The courtroom was silent. Everything was clear. Amelia and Candace had no legal claim left. The jury didn't take long to reach their verdict. The judge ruled that the family home would remain with us, exactly as Michael had intended. Candace and Amelia were found to have no legal rights to the property. In the days following the trial, reactions from friends and relatives were mixed. Most understood our decision and supported us. Others believed it was cruel to reveal the truth publicly, and Candace's life had been destroyed. But the truth is simple. The lies destroyed it, long before we ever stepped into that courtroom.
At the very least, I hope this situation became a life lesson for Candace. I truly believe that one day she may understand that this kind of strategy doesn't work. The truth always comes out eventually, and when it does, there are consequences. As for Michael, I think if Candace had treated him with genuine respect and kindness over the years, even after learning the truth about her biological father, he might have chosen to leave her something more. But that bridge had already been burned. Update 1. 3 days have passed since my last update. I read every message and piece of advice. Many people suggested that Candace might have already known about her mother's lie, but I truly don't believe that's the case. I saw her face in court when the DNA results were revealed. That shock was real. Winning the case lifted an enormous weight off my shoulders. I've decided not to dwell on the opinions of relatives who think we acted wrongly. We didn't drag ourselves into court. Amelia and Candace did. We simply told the truth. What worries me now is my husband. Michael is still struggling to process everything. His world has been turned upside down. Since learning that Candace isn't biologically his, he barely eats and hardly sleeps. I can't imagine the pain of realizing that the child you loved and raised was part of such a deep betrayal. Amelia already put him through hell during the divorce. Now, learning that Tom, the man who slept with his wife, was also the biological father of his first child, has shattered him completely. I suggested therapy. He needs professional help to process this level of trauma. I scheduled an appointment for him, and he starts next week. Update 2. A month has passed, and we're slowly finding our footing again. Michael has been attending therapy regularly, and while healing will take time, I can see small improvements. Unexpectedly, Candace reached out to us last week. Honestly, I assumed she would never speak to us again. She called to apologize for everything we had gone through. I wasn't sure whether it was genuine remorse or simply anger toward her mother, but I chose not to interrogate her intentions. She admitted she had always been jealous of me, believing that I had taken her father away. She confessed she hated me, something I already knew. For years, she believed her father had betrayed her mother. But during the trial, when the truth came out, and it became clear that Amelia was the one who cheated, Candace realized she had been living a lie her entire life.
She begged Michael not to leave her. He told her that regardless of biology, he would always be her father. That broke her completely. She cried harder than I had ever seen. She also apologized to me for how she treated me and said she hoped I could forgive her someday. I didn't pretend everything was suddenly fine. It wasn't. I told her honestly that I needed time before I could even think about being in the same room with her. Right now, my priority is my own family, my husband and my son. During the court battle, my child didn't get the attention he deserved. I'm planning a quiet family vacation to help us heal and reconnect. If anything else happens, I'll update again. Update 3. 3 months passed with no contact from Amelia until she showed up at our door. I hesitated to let her in, but I didn't want a public scene with neighbors listening. We made it clear that any outburst would result in the police being called. She came in tears. Tom had left her. He told her to move out by the end of the month and made it clear he no longer wanted to marry her. She had nowhere to go. She wanted to move in with Candace, who had absolutely refused. We learned that after the trial, Candace completely cut off contact with her mother, blaming her for years of manipulation and lies. Amelia came to us, hoping we would convince Candace to let her stay. Before I could even respond, Michael finally snapped. For the first time, I saw him truly lose his composure. He told Amelia that the apartment was bought solely for Candace, and only Candace had the right to decide who lived there. He reminded Amelia that she had never apologized for the affair and now expected help. He said he was glad Tom had finally seen her for who she really was and walked away. Amelia tried to justify herself, saying she was afraid of being thrown out while pregnant if she had told the truth back then. I couldn't listen anymore. We gave her a chance to speak, but there was nothing left to say. I asked her to leave. After she left, Michael contacted Candace to warn her if her mother moved in, getting her out later would be nearly impossible. Candace assured him that would never happen. She planned to change the locks and formally tell her mother she was done. As for me, I'm exhausted beyond words. Recently, Michael and I have been seriously discussing selling our house and moving to another state, leaving all of this behind for good. For the sake of our son and our marriage, we need peace. The decision isn't easy, but after Amelia's visit, it became clear that she would never stop trying to insert herself into our lives. Michael agreed. His job allows him to work remotely, and I'm willing to start over at a new firm if it means a healthier future for our family. Next month, we'll begin the process of selling our home. If all goes well, by the end of the year, we'll be starting a new life somewhere far away from all this toxicity. It's time to close this chapter and finally move forward.
7 years after our breakup, my ex showed up at my door with a child, demanding child support. A moment later, my wife stepped outside, and that was when my life truly went off the rails. Cindy and I met in college. We were both 23 when we started dating, and we stayed together for 4 years. After graduation, we rented an apartment and lived there for about a year, until she suddenly left me without any explanation. Cindy was a year older than me and in her final year of college when we met. I was painfully shy, so she was the one who made the first move. She asked me out. She was the first to say, "I love you." 6 months into the relationship, she was also the one who suggested we move in together after college. She was an amazing girlfriend in many ways, kind, affectionate, deeply emotional, but there was one serious issue: her overwhelming insecurity. I'm not sure where it came from. Maybe it was because I rarely initiated things in the relationship, or maybe it was something deeper, but she was constantly jealous and suspicious. She hated it whenever I talked to other women, no matter who they were. After a few arguments, I stopped talking to all my female friends. Cindy mattered more to me than any friendship. I cut off not only friends from college, but also girls I'd known since high school, people I'd been close to for over 5 years. Today, I'm back in touch with them. Cindy is no longer part of my life, and my wife has no problem with me having friends of any gender. But back then, I was only allowed to spend time with guys, and even that was restricted. Cindy didn't allow boys' nights, convinced they were just excuses to go drinking, get drunk, and hook up with someone. It felt unfair. She forbade me from seeing anyone without her because of her insecurity, but at the time I couldn't fully grasp how unhealthy this was. I was deeply in love with her and believed she loved me just as much. She constantly told me she couldn't live without me, that she saw no future without me, that I was everything to her. So I stayed. I wanted to marry her. That was all I wanted back then. Over time, though, the relationship became harder and harder to survive. She grew more suspicious, more controlling, more unstable. Once we were living together, I couldn't do anything without her hovering behind me. She checked my phone regularly, tracked my movements, and if I didn't tell her exactly where I was, she threatened not to let me back into the apartment. By this point, it's probably clear how toxic things had become. What still amazes me is that despite everything, she was the one who ended things. The breakup happened over something incredibly small. One afternoon, my sister Lauren dropped by unannounced, something she occasionally did. Normally, she would message both of us beforehand so Cindy wouldn't get suspicious or think I had another woman over. But that day, Cindy wasn't home. She was visiting a friend. She was allowed to see her friends. I was not allowed to question it. Lauren and I talked for about 2 hours. Then her boss called and she had to rush back to work. Before leaving, she pulled out a lipstick to touch up her makeup, and in her hurry, she accidentally left it on the couch. I didn't even notice. Cindy came home minutes later, cheerful and relaxed, until she sat down on the couch. She jumped up instantly, holding the lipstick she had just sat on. I knew immediately that I was doomed. I told her the truth right away. I explained that Lauren had stopped by during her lunch break, that she used the lipstick before heading back to work, and that she must have forgotten it in her rush. Cindy didn't believe a word. She said Lauren usually texted both of us before visiting. This time she hadn't. Cindy also claimed it made no sense for Lauren to use lipstick at our place, since my sister rarely wore makeup. She was convinced I had brought another woman into our home. She completely lost control. She started screaming, swearing, throwing things, first pillows, then books, then she crossed a line. She grabbed the TV remote and threw it straight at me. I'd barely managed to dodge it. That was the moment I had to get out. I ran into the bedroom and locked the door. I didn't have my phone with me, so I couldn't call anyone for help. I sat alone in that room for nearly an hour while she screamed outside, accusing me of betraying her. She sounded unhinged. I was genuinely afraid. Eventually, the screaming stopped. I gathered the courage to step outside. The apartment was empty. The front door was open. I didn't text or call her for the next couple of hours, assuming she went out to cool off, but when she still hadn't returned by midnight, I tried calling her. The call wouldn't go through. After a few attempts, I realized she had blocked me. I tried messaging her. Blocked there, too. She had also removed me from all her social media. I panicked and tried contacting her friends, but none of them answered. I later realized I was likely blocked by them as well. For weeks, I tried everything to reach her. She ignored me completely. After nearly a month, I finally gave up. I understood she didn't want to be found. I was devastated. The months that followed were the darkest period of my life. I don't even know how I survived it. I went to work, came home, missed her endlessly, and pretended everything was fine. People told me I was better off without her. I didn't feel that way. I stayed in that apartment for a full year, hoping she might come back. I thought if I stayed, she would know where to find me. When I finally moved out, I buried the last hope of ever seeing her again. We never got closure. That unresolved ending remains one of the deepest pains I carry. I fell into a severe depression and avoided women entirely, afraid that moving on would make me a traitor to Cindy. That changed when I met my current wife, Emmy. She was a coworker, warm, kind, welcoming, not just to me, but to everyone in the office. She was beautiful, intelligent, and had an incredible personality. Despite all my efforts to keep my distance, I fell in love with her within a few months. I'd promised myself I'd never enter another relationship after Cindy, but Emmy changed everything. We've been together for almost 4 years now, married for 2. I'm genuinely happy with her.
and until recently, I'd almost completely forgotten about Cindy, until the day she suddenly reappeared in my life.
7 years had passed since our breakup, or more accurately, since the moment she erased me from her life as if I had never mattered, all because of a ridiculous argument. Last weekend, my wife and I were simply relaxing at home when someone suddenly rang the doorbell. I went to answer it. Before I even had time to fully process who was standing there, she shoved a small boy into my arms. He looked about 7 years old. Cindy immediately demanded that I pay child support for the past 7 years. She didn't give me a chance to say a single word. She started screaming, claiming that for 7 years she had been trying to find me so her son could finally have a father. She accused me of running away from responsibility and insisted that I owed her years of unpaid support. I stood there in silence while she yelled. I didn't even know how to react. I was completely stunned. I just stood there like an idiot while she kept shouting. The accusations made no sense. I had waited an entire year after she vanished, hoping she would come back. She was the one who left me, not the other way around, and I was absolutely certain that the child wasn't mine. I stayed silent only because I was in shock. I couldn't even speak. When Emmy realized I had disappeared for a while, she came outside to see what was going on, and that was when everything flipped upside down. The moment Cindy saw my wife, all the color drained from her face. It was instantly clear that she was in serious trouble. At the time, I didn't yet understand why, but it was obvious that seeing Emmy completely rattled her. Emmy looked just as shocked to see Cindy standing at our door. Before I could say anything, the two of them started screaming at each other. I couldn't even follow what they were arguing about, but it was obvious they knew each other. This wasn't a first encounter. They went straight for each other, hurling insults, throwing the most vile words imaginable back and forth. Meanwhile, I stood there silently next to the boy, trying to understand what the hell was happening. Then Emmy finally brought out the heavy artillery. She told Cindy that if she didn't leave immediately, she was calling the police. That clearly wasn't an option Cindy wanted. She looked absolutely furious, but after one last round of insults and hateful looks thrown at both of us, she backed down. The moment Emmy repeated that she was calling the cops, Cindy grabbed her son and bolted as fast as she could. I had no idea what I had just witnessed. I assumed Emmy would explain everything once Cindy was gone. Instead, things somehow got even stranger. As soon as the door closed, Emmy turned to me and started yelling, asking how I could do this to her, how I could hide something like this from her. I still said nothing. I just stared at her in complete confusion. Her accusations made no sense to me. She acted as if I had deliberately hidden my past relationship with Cindy, but that wasn't true. I had always been open with Emmy. I told her everything about my ex. The only thing I hadn't done was show her pictures of Cindy. Not because I was hiding anything, there was simply nothing to show. I had lost my old phone before we moved into the new house. Every photo I had of Cindy was on that phone. When I lost it, I lost all of them. On top of that, I had already deleted most of our photos from social media because they were too painful to look at. Seeing reminders of how she disappeared without explanation hurt too much. So, first I deleted the photos, then I lost the phone, and that was it. No pictures left anywhere. I never tried to recover them. Honestly, I thought it was for the best. Fewer reminders. A few group photos still existed on my friends' accounts, but I asked them to remove those too. I didn't want to see myself with her. If Emmy had ever asked to see what Cindy looked like, I would have shown her whatever I could find. But she never asked, and digging through other people's albums for old photos felt pointless, especially since Emmy never showed any interest. So she never saw Cindy's face. After everything that happened, Emmy said she needed to go stay with her parents for a while, to cool off, sort through her feelings, and maybe come back later. I begged her to stay, but she left anyway. She said she couldn't be in the same space with me right now and needed time alone to process everything. I didn't even fully understand what she meant. She didn't explain.
The whole situation felt like déjà vu, like history repeating itself, just like with Cindy. I was completely crushed. The next day, I finally forced myself to start making calls, trying to understand what was really going on. I called her parents first. They immediately attacked me, saying I should have told them about Cindy beforehand and not let everything explode like this. They tore into me and then hung up without giving me any real answers. Desperate, I called Emmy's older sister. She was the only person left who might explain something. I was lost, and she was my last hope. When she answered, I told her everything that had happened. That was when I finally learned the truth. Cindy and Emmy were cousins. Cindy's real name was Cynthia. The names I'm using here aren't their real ones, and I never called her that myself, which is why Emmy never made the connection. Apparently, Cindy had always been cruel and had been tormenting Emmy since childhood. Their relationship had been strained for years, but everything completely collapsed on Emmy's 18th birthday. Cindy slept with Emmy's boyfriend, the one she had been dating for nearly 3 years. The entire family exploded. Emmy's mother, who was Cindy's mother's sister, caused a massive scandal over Cindy's behavior. Naturally, each side defended their own child, and the families completely cut contact after that. But it didn't end there. Cindy continued to harass Emmy by spreading disgusting rumors about her online. Things escalated so badly that the parents had to intervene again. Only then did Cindy finally leave Emmy alone, and only because her parents forced her to. The cousins never spoke again, until they met again because of me. After that conversation, everything finally made sense. I understood why Emmy lost control when she saw Cindy on our doorstep. Seeing her, or Cynthia as Emmy knew her, dragged painful memories back to the surface for both of us. I spoke to Emmy after that call. Her sister had clearly spoken to her as well, because for the first time, Emmy finally answered my call. Until then, she had been rejecting every one. I told her I understood why she reacted the way she did, but I also told her the truth, that she never asked, never shown any interest in Cindy, and that I never meant to hide anything from her.
That made complete sense to me. All of that was in the past, and she was my future. If she had asked me even once about Cindy, I would have shown her a photo immediately, and all of this would have been resolved long ago. I tried to calmly explain my point of view, but for some reason she still believed I was at fault, that I should have talked more about my past relationship. According to her, if I had done that, she might have asked questions herself, and we would have discovered everything earlier. I honestly didn't understand what exactly I had done wrong, and I told her that. That only made things worse. She became even angrier and stopped talking to me, calling me stupid and self-absorbed before hanging up. She said she had gone through hell because of Cindy and expected me to understand that. I replied that I had gone through hell with her too, but I didn't see Emmy trying to understand me. That seemed to hit a nerve. She snapped, "Fine, you win the contest for having the worst ex," and ended the call. Since then, she hasn't answered my calls or messages. I feel like I completely screwed everything up. My wife doesn't lose her temper easily, so it was obvious this was a deeply painful and sensitive subject for her. But damn it, it was painful for me too. Putting all the blame on me alone felt unfair, especially when I genuinely didn't understand what I was supposed to have done differently. The only thing I was grateful for was that Cindy hadn't shown up again. If she kept inserting herself into my life, this mess would only get worse. Update 1. First of all, thank you to everyone who shared advice and thoughts. I truly appreciated every response. For those who asked whether my wife had ever mentioned being bullied in the past, no, she hadn't. She never talked about her childhood. I only learned about it after speaking with her sister. Even though I knew this wasn't technically my fault, I decided to take initiative and go to my wife's parents' house. I wanted to save our relationship. I understood that if I wanted to be with Emmy, I had to try to fix things, even if I wasn't the one who caused them. Because we're supposed to fight the problem together, not each other. Yesterday, after almost a week of silence, I finally went to see her. Both Emmy and her parents were surprised to see me at the door. I didn't wait for their reaction. The moment the door opened, I hugged her tightly. She froze for a second, then hugged me back. We stood there like that for several minutes without saying a word. The past week had been brutal for both of us, and we both realized that more than anything, we just wanted to be together. Who was right and who was wrong no longer mattered. As soon as I let go, she apologized and broke down crying. She admitted she had genuinely thought she'd lost me forever because of her outburst after Cindy's visit and the way she behaved afterwards. She admitted she acted irrationally and unfairly, apologizing over and over. Her parents and I comforted her while she cried. It meant a lot to see that she recognized she hadn't been fair to me. At the same time, I felt guilty for not coming to see her sooner, because that delay was what finally pushed her over the edge. After we talked everything through, she packed her things and came home with me. We're back together now. I can't say everything is completely back to normal, but we're working on it. We're slowly unpacking everything that happened over the past week, including Cindy's visit. And we still needed to figure out why she showed up in the first place. Update 2. We finally learned why Cindy came to our house. No surprises. She wanted money. She made that clear immediately by demanding child support for a child I had absolutely no connection to, emotionally or biologically. Emmy and her sister made several calls to figure out what was really going on, since the families hadn't spoken in years. They confirmed what I already knew. The child is not mine. Apparently, she had been seeing another man for years. I strongly suspect she was cheating on me during the final months of our relationship. I don't have proof, but everything lines up. She dumped me on the most ridiculous excuse and erased me from my life like I never existed. It makes perfect sense that she already had someone else lined up. Most likely, she was already pregnant when she left me and just needed a reason to disappear. The incident of my sister was the perfect excuse. Many of her relatives knew about the other man, but I was forbidden from communicating with her family unless Cindy herself was present, so I knew nothing and never would have if she hadn't made the massive mistake of showing up at my house trying to pressure me into giving me money. It turned out the man she was with left her a few months ago. She had quit her job when she got involved with him and had no savings after giving birth. When he disappeared, she was left with nothing. He did exactly what she had done to me, vanished without explanation. Now she's barely scraping by. Her parents refused to support her financially, saying they needed to save for retirement. If they supported her and the child, they wouldn't be able to retire at all. Harsh, maybe, but now her desperation made sense. After the incident at my house, none of Cindy's relatives have seen her. I'm sure someone will eventually track her down or report her, because rumors say she's already scammed a few people out of money. They're just rumors for now, but after what she tried to pull with me, I wouldn't be surprised if they were true. Update 3. We decided to start couples therapy, along with individual sessions. It turns out we hadn't dealt with our past as well as we thought. Cindy's mere appearance was enough to throw our lives into chaos. We couldn't allow that to happen again. As for Cindy, according to some relatives, she's now living with a new man she met online just days ago. He's already madly in love with her and invited her to move in. Her parents are devastated, not just by her behavior, but by the fact that she told them they're no longer allowed to see their grandchild. I'm not taking her side, but honestly, what did they expect? They turned away when she needed them most, and now they're shocked things aren't fine. They've always enabled her behavior, towards me and towards Emmy. Her parents were never particularly pleasant people, and she's no different. The apple didn't fall far from the tree. What truly breaks my heart is that a child is the one paying the price for all her terrible decisions. That's where this story ends.
Hi everyone. I turned 18 just a few days ago, and for my birthday, my dad surprised me with something incredible. My very first international trip to India, just the two of us. This trip was supposed to be something really special for so many reasons. My mom passed away when I was only 6. To cope with the loss, my dad and I used to watch Indian movies together all the time. They were colorful, uplifting, and helped brighten even the darkest days. That's how I fell in love with Indian culture. My mom loved those films too. She even had a collection of traditional Indian outfits, even though she never actually got to visit India herself. Before she died, she and my dad promised we'd go there as a family one day.
Sadly, she passed away from a sudden brain aneurysm in her sleep before we could make that dream come true. She was only 32. After her death, it was just me and Dad. Watching movies together became our little ritual to keep her memory alive and stay close. Over the years, it made our bond stronger than ever. I know Mom would be proud of us today. That's why India has always held such a deep emotional meaning for both of us. It's not just a trip, it's a promise finally coming true. When Dad revealed at my birthday party that he'd booked the trip, I was ecstatic. I couldn't stop smiling. But not everyone was happy for me. My stepmom, Susan, and her daughter, Nadia, 17, looked like someone had slapped them. And sure enough, after the guests left, I overheard them arguing with my dad. From what I caught, Susan thought he should have postponed the trip so we could all go as a family. Honestly, I was relieved that it would just be the two of us. I don't get along with Susan or Nadia at all, and past family vacations with them were a nightmare. I couldn't imagine them ruining this one too, especially since it meant so much to me emotionally. Luckily, they had their own reasons not to join anyway. Nadia had her final exams and upcoming graduation, and Susan was tied up with an important project at work. Still, I can't help but feel Dad timed things perfectly so it could be just us, even if he'll never admit it. Susan and Nadia came into my life about 5 years ago. At first, everything seemed fine. They acted friendly enough while Dad was just dating Susan. But once he married her 2 years ago, things shifted. Their attitude toward me became cold and strange for no reason I could figure out. I hadn't done anything differently, yet suddenly I was treated like an outsider in my own home. And now, well, let's just say their jealousy hit a whole new level. Things were already bad with my stepmom and stepsister, but what they did before my trip crossed every line. I was never close with Susan or Nadia, but at least in the beginning our relationship was civil and polite. That all changed after Dad married Susan. Suddenly, she started treating me like dirt, and Nadia copied every move her mother made. They'd talk down to me, make nasty little remarks, and act cruel, but only when Dad wasn't around. The moment he walked into the room, they'd flip the switch and turn into sweet, smiling angels. It was so fake it made my skin crawl. Eventually, I needed to tell Dad what was going on. We sat down for a family talk, and at first, Susan and Nadia denied everything. Luckily, I had recorded one of our earlier conversations where they were openly horrible to me. With evidence on the table, they couldn't lie anymore. So instead of denying, they switched to emotional manipulation. They both burst into tears and told Dad they only acted that way because they felt like I hadn't accepted them as family, which was total nonsense. I did see them as family. It was them who treated me like garbage. Yet somehow they expected me to keep being nice to them while they showed me zero respect. Dad was confused and torn. Susan was the first woman he'd really cared for since Mom, and I knew he didn't want to lose that relationship so easily. He asked all of us to try harder to get along. For his sake, I agreed to keep things civil. After that, their behavior shifted again. Instead of being nice in front of Dad and cruel behind his back, they just chose to completely ignore me whenever he wasn't around. It was like I didn't exist. Honestly, I preferred it that way. At least they weren't actively tormenting me. For Dad's sake, we kept up the performance of being one happy family, and that carried on for about a year. Fast forward to just a few days ago. The morning after my birthday, Dad and I had breakfast together, and I pulled him aside. I asked him straight out if Susan and Nadia were upset about not joining us on the India trip. He admitted they were, but also reminded me how much this trip meant to us, especially with it falling so close to Mom's death anniversary. He wanted this to be our special time together, just father and daughter. He promised he'd smooth things over with them later. That was fine by me. Honestly, vacations with Susan and Nadia were torture. Dad and I are explorers. We love walking around, sightseeing, soaking up every bit of culture.
They, on the other hand, prefer to sit in the hotel and complain if we're even a little late for dinner. To me, that's not a vacation, that's being trapped. India was supposed to be different. India was supposed to be ours. I didn't think there was anything wrong with that, especially since Susan and Nadia had taken their own little trips together in the past. The only real difference was that ours was longer and farther away, 10 days overseas instead of just a weekend somewhere nearby. But still, it felt completely fair. Dad told me not to stress, to focus on packing and getting ready. He promised he'd deal with Susan and Nadia after we got back. So I did exactly that. For the past 2 days, I was walking on air, too excited to care about their drama. Yesterday, I finished packing everything, double-checked my documents, and tucked my passport into my bag so it would be ready. Our flight was scheduled for today. But now, I don't even know if we're going anymore, because Susan and Nadia crossed a line so insane I still can't believe it. They burned my passport. Yes, burned it. Not lost, not misplaced, they literally destroyed it. I found out just a few hours ago. It was around 6 p.m. yesterday when I was organizing paperwork and noticed it was missing from my bag. By 2 a.m., the truth came out. They had actually set it on fire.
They burned my passport before my trip. My dad's revenge was brutal. When I went through my bag to double-check everything before our flight, I realized my passport wasn't there. At first, I thought maybe I misplaced it, so I tore the entire house apart. Drawers, shelves, even the laundry baskets. 45 minutes later, I was sweating, panicking, and close to tears. It was just gone. That's when Susan and Nadia waltzed into my room with these fake sweet voices and asked, "Lose something?" I immediately felt something was off, but in desperation, I admitted I couldn't find my passport anywhere. That's when Susan tossed something on my bed. It was my passport, or at least what was left of it. Half burned, charred along the edges, completely ruined. She smirked and asked, "Was this what you were looking for?" I froze. My brain couldn't even process it at first. When the shock finally wore off, I decided I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of watching me break down. I calmly set the ruined passport aside, stood up, shut the door in their faces, locked it, and then I collapsed into tears. Dad wasn't home. He was out picking up clothes for the trip. I texted him everything that happened, even attached a photo of the burned passport. Within 20 minutes, I heard him storming into the house. His voice shook the walls as he screamed at Susan and Nadia, calling them psychos and ordering them out. He said he'd already made one mistake when he ignored the first time they mistreated me, and he wasn't about to repeat it just because he once loved Susan. Of course, they immediately tried to fake cry and blame me. Their story? That I'd supposedly left a lit cigarette on my dresser, and that's how my passport caught fire. Which is insane. I don't even smoke. At that point, I came downstairs because I couldn't let them spin lies like that. Dad looked at me and said I was just in time because he had something planned. I assumed he was about to call the police, but no. He went into his office and came back with a stack of papers. Nadia's face went pale the second she saw them. Then, without saying a word, Dad ripped the documents in half right in front of Susan. Turns out those papers were for Nadia's student loan. She needed Dad to co-sign so she could pay for college since Susan hadn't saved a dime for her. Dad had been ready to help. Not anymore. That was his revenge. My passport for her college dream. Fair trade, honestly. Within an hour, Susan and Nadia were gone. They begged, pleaded, even got on their knees, but Dad didn't budge. Now, since the moment they left, they've been spamming me with texts, Nadia especially. She keeps begging me to convince Dad to reconsider, promising she'll do anything to make up for it. She claims they never knew Dad was going to co-sign her loan, and that they just lashed out because they felt excluded. I finally replied once, I reminded them that they've gone on plenty of mother-daughter trips without us, so why is it unfair when Dad and I wanted one international trip with Dad, without my stepmother and stepsister? Their getaways usually last only 2 to 3 days, somewhere nearby, while ours was supposed to be 10 full days in India. That's a big difference. So here I am asking, am I really the bad guy for wanting one international trip with my dad without my stepmother and stepsister? Well, before I continue, I'll just say what I think the answer is. No, not at all. This situation seems clear. I wasn't wrong. I wanted time with my dad, especially on my 18th birthday, and especially since it was in honor of my late mom. What Susan and Nadia did was cruel and manipulative, and it says more about them than about me. My dad, he's the one I feel bad for. He fell for a woman who clearly didn't respect me, and by extension, didn't really love him the way she should have.
Update 2. A lot of people asked why we didn't call the cops after they destroyed my passport. The truth? It didn't even cross my mind at first. I was in shock, panicking, crying. And honestly, what would it have done? They would have just claimed it was an accident, dragged it out forever, and nothing would change. We didn't want that mess. Others also asked why I wasn't in college yet. I graduated high school last year and decided to take a gap year to figure myself out. I worked a few jobs, interned in journalism, and gained some experience in the field I want to study. Now I'm applying to schools, and luckily my grandparents have already promised to cover my tuition, so my dad doesn't have to stress about me. Nadia's situation was completely different, which is why Dad was planning to co-sign her student loan. But after what happened, well, you already know how that ended. As for our trip, today was supposed to be our flight to India. Instead, we stayed home and watched old movies we used to love. It wasn't the same, but honestly, it helped. I finally blocked both Susan and Nadia, and I don't regret it. They don't deserve my sympathy. You were all right. I was only second-guessing myself because I'd been missing my mom and was in a very emotional state. But they betrayed me for no reason, and whatever happens to them now, they absolutely brought on themselves. Update 3. It's been 4 days since my last post, and today Dad came home from work with big news. He filed for divorce. Afterward, we finally had the conversation we'd been avoiding for far too long. He admitted that he'd been selfish. He loved Susan and tried to convince himself it would work out, even when her behavior, and Nadia's, clearly proved otherwise. Instead of trying to repair things with me, they simply shut me out completely. That's not family. That's not love. Dad told me he finally realized he'd been clinging to something toxic and that it was damaging both of us. He deserves better. I deserve better. Maybe he did love her, but it was obvious she didn't love him enough to even tolerate me, and that's not the kind of woman he should spend his life with. Update 3. The reason Susan never truly accepted me was simple. She could never see me as part of her family. Deep down, she probably knew that for Dad, I would always come first, and that neither she nor Nadia could ever replace me. That jealousy and insecurity made her bitter, and eventually it poisoned everything. Dad may never fully understand why their behavior shifted so dramatically, because before the wedding they treated me kindly, but the moment the vows were said, it's like they became different people overnight. Dad admitted he ignored the signs, hoping things would somehow settle, but the damage was already done. He told me he's finished pretending. We're not a happy family, and there's no point acting like one. That same day, after meeting with his lawyer, he filed for divorce. Later, he apologized for everything I'd had to endure because of his choices, and we just hugged. Some might call him a flawed father, but to me, he's the best dad I could ever ask for. Sure, he made mistakes and sometimes thought only of himself, but every mistake was outweighed by 10 good things he did for me. I love him, and I always will. Update 4. A few days later, it became official. Susan was served divorce papers. Dad came home early from work and locked himself in his office. I could hear him shouting into the phone, and it had me worried.
Hours later, he finally explained. Susan had called, threatening to ruin him if he went through with the divorce. She promised to spread lies, throw accusations, and destroy his reputation. The first time she caught him off guard at work, but once he was home, he recorded the call. When she realized he had proof, she flipped out, accused him of blackmail, and turned the whole thing into chaos. Dad didn't back down. He told her if she tried to drag his name through the mud, he'd make sure she would regret it. From her voice, he could tell she was shaken. He said the process will start soon, and once it's finalized, he and I will finally take that trip to India together. He promised me. For now, we just hope she doesn't create more problems. But honestly, with the evidence I have, including the destroyed passport, she knows she's fighting a losing battle. Update 5. Hi again, quick update because I'm super busy. The divorce is officially finalized, and the outcome? Honestly, Dad hit the jackpot. Susan walked away with nothing. No alimony, no settlement, no ridiculous child support she tried to claim out of nowhere. She fought dirty, but it didn't work. So now it's just us. We kept everything, and for the first time in a long time, life feels calm. I already have my new passport, and Dad and I have started planning our India trip again. This time, it's really happening. I can't even describe how excited I am. More importantly, I'm genuinely happy now. Thank you all for your support along the way.
Almost 7 years ago, my family cut me off completely and threw me out of the house. At the time, I was only 22, still working my first job, not financially stable enough to rent on my own. It all happened so suddenly that I had no time to prepare, emotionally or financially. And the reason for all of it was my sister, Hannah. Hannah and I were never especially close. She was quite a bit older than me. By the time she was 27, she married her boyfriend, Pete. They stayed married for about 3 years before she filed for divorce, claiming Pete had been cheating on her with one of my friends. Back then, I was still living with my parents after college, saving money before moving out. Everything at home was fine until Hannah came back one night in tears, declaring she'd discovered Pete's betrayal. According to her, he had been having an affair for 6 months, and somehow it was my fault. The reason? I had introduced Pete to my friend Emily. She had been struggling to gain weight, and since Pete was a certified nutritionist, he offered to help her out. That was it. Hannah twisted that into a story that Emily was the woman Pete cheated with. I was stunned. Emily and I weren't super close, but I knew her well enough to believe she would never get involved with a married man. And Pete? If anything, he always seemed hopelessly devoted to Hannah. He talked about her constantly, and not once in those 3 years did I see anything suspicious. But none of my doubts mattered. My parents instantly sided with Hannah. They didn't ask for evidence, didn't question anything. They just took her word for it. I can't blame them for choosing their daughter over their son-in-law, but what broke me was how quickly they turned on me. Hannah stormed into the house one day, hysterical, and convinced them that I was to blame for ruining her marriage, simply because I had introduced Pete to Emily. Within minutes, they told me to pack my things and leave. When I begged them to listen, they said if I didn't go on my own, they'd throw me out. And just like that, I lost my home and my family in the same day. I still remember sitting on the curb outside with my bags, crying for an hour before finally calling a friend to let me crash at his place. I tried reaching out to my parents in the days that followed. Calls, texts, visits, nothing worked. They blocked my number. The one time I went to the house, my mom threatened to call the police if I didn't leave. That's when it hit me. They truly believed I was responsible. Looking back, maybe I shouldn't have been surprised. Hannah was always the favorite. I was the unexpected second child, the one who got leftovers while she got the spotlight. As kids, it didn't matter much to me, but I never thought that favoritism would destroy my place in the family entirely. Pete blocked me too. No explanation, no chance to defend myself. And Hannah moved back in with my parents, making it impossible for me to even try talking things out. The only person left who might know the truth was Emily. We weren't close, but I reached out anyway, and when I explained what Hannah had accused me of, she was horrified. She swore nothing ever happened between her and Pete, that their interactions had been strictly professional. To prove it, she even told me about her long-term boyfriend. They were already talking about marriage. She showed me photos of the two of them together. Her explanation made infinitely more sense than anything Hannah had said. Deep down, I already knew Hannah had lied, probably to cover the real reason for the divorce. But without any proof, I was powerless. My family had made up their minds, and I was left alone. Back then, all I wanted was to reconnect with my family. Despite everything they had done to me, I still missed them terribly. But as time passed, I had no choice but to adapt. I found an apartment, poured myself into work, and tried to build a life. Bills had to be paid, and keeping myself busy was the only way I knew how to cope. It wasn't easy. The pain was overwhelming. But slowly, I taught myself to move forward, with or without their support. Years went by, and life began to change for the better. I moved out of that tiny apartment into something much nicer, built a stable career, and just last week, I proposed to the woman I've been dating for 2 years. She said yes. But the real turning point came shortly after my engagement. A few days after my fiancée, Lisa, posted our engagement photos on Instagram and cross-shared them to Facebook, I got an email. Not just any email, but the email that finally explained everything that had happened years ago, complete with proof. It turned out that Lisa, who works as a doctor, had once met Pete, my former brother-in-law, at a medical seminar. They had stayed loosely connected on Facebook. That's how he stumbled across our engagement post. For the first time in years, I was glad the world was so small. Instead of messaging me directly, Pete chose to send an anonymous email. Later, he explained it was because he didn't want to seem awkward. After all, years had passed since the divorce, and he had no desire to look like someone still clinging to the past. He also admitted that since he blocked me back then, it felt strange to just pop back up in my life. But what mattered was the content. The email laid out the full truth behind the divorce, and it completely shattered the story Hannah had built. It was Hannah who had been unfaithful, not Pete. And worse, she had cheated with my friend Frank. At the time, Frank worked as a cashier at the local grocery store. Never in a million years would I have suspected anything between them. They'd been so careful to hide it. But Pete eventually found out. When confronted, Hannah tried to twist the situation, telling Pete that it was my fault. She claimed I had introduced her to Frank, even encouraging their connection by mentioning his interest in music since she was a decent singer herself. From there, she said, things just happened. To cover her tracks, she even insisted I had helped them hide the affair all along, which was, of course, a blatant lie. Pete admitted he was furious when he found out. Instead of thinking clearly, he blocked everyone in my family, including me. Looking back, he knows it was the wrong move, but at the time, anger clouded everything.
The email itself included screenshots of conversations between Hannah and Frank. Messages where they openly confessed their love, joked about how easy it was to fool Pete, and arranged secret meetups. Hannah had even signed off using her rarely mentioned middle name, something only a few people knew. There was no denying it. Reading those messages was surreal. For the first time in years, I had undeniable proof. Hannah had lied about everything. I eventually confronted Pete in person after realizing he was in Lisa's Facebook friends list. He admitted that Emily, my friend who had originally been accused, had told him her side years ago. He just never told me because he didn't want to stir things up again. He regretted it now, because if he had spoken up earlier, I could have cleared my name long ago. Still, he was willing to help me now. Pete and I agreed that Hannah's lies had destroyed enough lives, and neither of us wanted her manipulations to stand unchallenged any longer. The truth was clear. Hannah had weaponized her family's trust to protect herself, even if it meant sacrificing me. She dragged my name through the mud, convinced my parents to disown me, all to keep her own reputation intact while she pursued her affair. And for the first time in years, I had the evidence to finally set the record straight. I'm certain my sister never once tried to tell our parents the truth. Instead, she kept feeding them lies during the divorce, and they swallowed every word without hesitation. She knew that if our parents ever discovered she was the one who cheated, she'd be in serious trouble, and she just couldn't allow that. Well, now the truth is finally out, and I'm going to use it to destroy her life the same way she destroyed mine all those years ago. I wasn't sure if my parents were still living in the same house, since I hadn't seen them in 7 years, but an old neighbor confirmed they never moved. Even better, Hannah still lived there. That didn't surprise me at all. She was always lazy and hated responsibility. Living off aging parents while they did everything for her was exactly her style. 2 days ago, Pete and I showed up unannounced. My mom opened the door, and we pushed our way inside before she could react. My dad and Hannah were sitting in the living room, the happy family reunited, but only for a moment. Their faces twisted as soon as they saw us. My dad immediately started shouting, threatening to call the police if we didn't leave. I told him he could do whatever he wanted, but only after reading the documents we brought. My parents looked confused, while Hannah turned pale and bolted to her room. I figured she was trying to avoid the inevitable, but there was no escaping it. Pete pulled out the divorce papers and screenshots of Hannah's messages with Frank, while I explained the real story. Pete also revealed how Hannah had been forced to give up our grandmother's diamond heirloom ring to settle the divorce, since her teacher's salary couldn't cover the payout. My parents were stunned. We sat there watching as the drama unfolded. My dad demanded answers from Hannah, but when she tried lying yet again, even with the evidence right in front of her, he'd had enough. He packed her belongings, shoved them into a bag, and kicked her out of the house on the spot. I didn't need to be told twice. Pete and I walked out together, leaving Hannah begging our parents to let her back in, exactly the way I had once begged them years ago. It was the sweetest revenge. I felt nothing but satisfaction. A couple days later, Hannah showed up at my place, demanding I fix things with our parents. I don't even know how she found my address, but I told her point blank that I owed her nothing. She ruined my life, and I simply returned the favor. We were even now. Apparently, she has no pride left, because the moment I said that, she broke down sobbing, calling me a monster. I honestly didn't care. I put on my headphones, turned up the music, and let Lisa keep working peacefully in her office. Eventually, she left, but not before scrawling a message on my door with a marker reminding me that I'm a vengeful monster. To be honest, I don't feel bad about what I did. I don't think I'm the villain here. I didn't lie or scheme like she did. I just exposed the truth. So, am I really the bad guy for ruining my sister's life and getting her kicked out of our parents' home 7 years after she blamed me for her divorce? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Update 1. Hannah didn't stop bothering me. Even after a week, she kept calling nonstop, 14 times in a day. I finally threatened to involve the police, and that made her back off, at least for now. I have no idea how she keeps getting my number after I block her, but apparently she has her friends add me into group calls from different numbers. She's tried guilt-tripping me, saying her teacher salary isn't enough to live on, but I know that's not the real issue. What she really hates is finally having to pay rent, utilities, and groceries herself. And honestly, that's not my problem. As for my parents, they're not much better. They found me on Facebook after seeing Lisa's engagement post. Now they're suddenly interested in being part of my life again. They even hinted that they expect to be invited to my wedding. They still haven't apologized, but somehow think they deserve to show up on one of the most important days of my life. Lisa and I laughed reading their messages because they were so delusional it almost seemed like a bad joke. But in truth, the whole thing is more sad than funny.
Update 2. Hannah showed up at my house again, even after I threatened to report her for harassment yesterday. I was getting ready to leave for work, but she stopped me by flopping onto the hood of my car, refusing to move until I spoke with her. It was incredibly annoying, and this time I actually called the police. They took her away while she screamed and cried, trying to paint me as the bad guy. Unfortunately for her, nobody bought it. It took some time to file the official report against her, but as soon as I did, I rushed to work so this incident wouldn't ruin my day. I figured my parents would bail her out since she's their favorite, and I was right. They sent her home and then followed up with a long message telling me I had been too harsh and unfair to them over a mistake they supposedly made almost 10 years ago. It was laughable. Nothing my sister and parents did to me back then could ever be called merciful or fair. No mercy stopped them from literally throwing me out of the house with nowhere to go. So now, I see no reason to offer forgiveness or kindness. I messaged my parents saying that after all these years, they had lost any right to tell me what I can or cannot do, and that they should stop deluding themselves. I haven't blocked them yet, had to check the message first, but I will soon. Hopefully then, I can finally cut that whole family out of my life for good. Update 3. I just got home from work, checked my socials, and saw that my parents sent me another long message. Lisa and I read it together, and I swear it was the funniest thing I've ever seen. These poor people don't realize that nothing they say or do now can hurt me. I just laughed at how pathetic they are. They still think we're a family and announced they'd taken Hannah back, claiming both of their children deserve a second chance, as if I was ever in the wrong. They expected Lisa and me to visit them for dinner before my wedding to civilly resolve our differences. Too bold of them to assume I'd ever want them anywhere near my wedding. We laughed at their absurd message, and I responded that I had zero interest in any invitations from them. I'm perfectly happy living my life without them, just like I have for the last 7 years. They made it clear long ago that I'm better off without them. I'm grateful it took me so long to realize that. I no longer need them or their so-called forgiveness. They can continue playing happy family with Hannah all they want. I don't care. After sending that last message, I blocked them permanently. That's it. I'm done. I'm sure they'll try to contact me again somehow, but it doesn't matter. Lisa is the only family I need, and I'm happier than I've ever been with just her. My parents and sister never could see past their own noses, and I doubt they ever will. Next time they try to reach out, they'll be talking to my lawyer.
My boss demoted me, but still expected me to work just as hard as before. This happened a couple of years ago, but first I need to give a little background to set the scene. I grew up in a pretty poor family in the southern US. Despite that, I studied like crazy and earned a full scholarship to one of the top universities in the country, maybe even the world. I'm not trying to brag, it's just the truth. I realized early on that I absorb information fast, and it helps me work efficiently. And thanks to years spent collecting cans for money and working outside with my dad all day, I developed stubborn persistence and a strong work ethic. Being the oldest of 6 children, growing up in poverty also taught me to read people, their intentions, small cues, everything between the lines. In short, I was practically built for malicious compliance. After graduating from a great university, I moved back home to be close to my family and start my career. I also didn't care much for the Northeast, where my university was. It felt too gray and cold to me. I started with a crappy job just to get my foot in the door, then briefly worked at a startup. Eventually, I landed a position at a local government agency, earning almost double what I made before. The agency, well, specifically our county office, was notorious for insane turnover, awful coworkers, and an overall toxic and exhausting environment. Add to that the clients, who were often some of the most difficult people in the community, and the job drained every ounce of energy a person could have. But for a young guy, the salary felt good enough to deal with the pain. So when they offered me the job, I accepted, as cheerfully as someone can when walking straight into hell. I started in May. I worked my butt off from day one. I read the entire 350-page manual in my free time. I took on unpaid side tasks. I helped coworkers, even if it meant working more hours than I could handle. Sometimes I'd show up at 8 a.m. and wouldn't leave until 2 or 3 in the morning.
I once had to cancel a long-planned date with my serious girlfriend because they called me in unexpectedly, and I stayed until late at night. I consistently worked far more than I wanted, but they just kept piling on work because I was performing well. My supervisor would always say things like, "That's just how things are here. It's for the good of the agency. The best employees are the ones who sacrifice themselves for everyone else." Outside of work, she seemed like a perfectly pleasant woman, but a small part of me grew more irritated every time I heard those lines. By June, only 1 month in, I was already looking for escape routes, just like all the talented people who quit before me. I reached out to an MBA program that had always interested me, and they told me I should apply. Within a couple of days, the program director contacted me personally and scheduled an interview. The interview lasted 15 minutes. He thanked me for my time and ended the Skype call. Before the week was over, I received an email offering me a full ride scholarship plus a small but very useful monthly stipend as long as I agreed to work as a graduate assistant for 20 hours a week during semesters. I was thrilled and signed the acceptance document immediately. Just like that, in under a week, I went from drowning under a growing mountain of stress to becoming a future graduate student. The program began in January, which gave me about 5 months. I decided I'd stick it out at the agency, save as much money as possible, and then leave in December. Since I'm an honest person, I told my supervisor about my plans and explained that I'd be resigning at the end of December because I'd been given an incredible MBA opportunity. She congratulated me, said she was glad for my success, and told me she'd think about the next steps and get back to me soon. A couple of weeks passed, each day draining me a little more, like a river slowly eroding its banks. Finally, she called me into her office for a meeting. She told me I could stay with the agency, but only if I agreed to move into what she called a contract position. She said they needed me to vacate my current role so they could open it as an official vacancy and prepare it for a new hire.
She insisted that all of this was for the good of the agency, and that someone as principled, hardworking, and ethical as me would agree to such terms, and should agree to them. Remember those words, because they'll matter later. I asked what exactly would change, and she gave me a vague summary. That wasn't enough for me. She wasn't a terrible manager, but life taught me one rule: never sign anything unless you've personally read every line. So I requested a week to decide and asked for all documents detailing every change, benefits, duties, restrictions, everything. She promised to bring the paperwork the next day. And that's where the malicious compliance began. The following afternoon, she handed me 12 double-sided pages packed with text. Every page was filled with size 10 times New Roman, the kind of formatting that makes sentences blend into each other like wet ink. Even the most dedicated reader would fall asleep halfway through it. I read the packet that night, and with each page, my mood sank lower and lower. I was losing nearly every benefit except my accumulated overtime. My title was being reduced. Several privileges I had earned were simply gone. But halfway through, something changed. I suddenly sat up. I had found a tiny clause buried deep in legal sludge, stating that under this new contract, I could not work more than 40 hours a week. I was forbidden from performing many of the tasks I had grown to despise. I was required to do only the duties explicitly listed in the new job description. In other words, once I hit 40 hours, I was done. No exceptions, no pitching in, no being a team player. As I reread that microscopic sentence, a slow smile crept across my face. At first it was small, the polite "I'm pretending to be interested" smile you give on a bad date. Then it grew wider and wider until I probably resembled the Grinch plotting to steal Christmas. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I was so energized I barely slept. The next morning, I walked into the office prepared. My manager was delighted to hear I accepted the new contract. Of course, she had no idea how happy I actually was. After I handed her the signed pages, she began explaining what she wanted me to handle over the next 2 weeks. I quickly, but calmly, told her I wouldn't be able to do that. I explained that as a responsible and ethical employee, I must strictly follow my new contract. She stared at me,
confusion mixing with anger, as I laid it all out. I could no longer perform several tasks I used to because the contract prohibited them. I could not work overtime under any circumstances unless my hours were officially recorded. Once I reached 40 hours, I was required to stop working immediately and go home. After-hours calls, emails, and messages, not allowed. Everything would have to wait until Monday at 8 a.m. I was no longer permitted to take on call shifts. They'd need to find someone else fast, which would be, challenging. I couldn't help coworkers the way I used to because I no longer had the authority, the time, or the legal right to do so. Her stare could have melted steel, and the longer I continued, the more intense it became. When I left her office, which was now seconds away from metaphorically exploding, I sat down and began drafting an email. Here's the thing. In my own position, you needed certified training before you were legally allowed to sign off on cases and documents. If you hadn't completed that training and anyone found out, attorneys could tear the agency apart. Because of the county's incompetence, I never got that training, yet they still had me doing a job from day one. Every request I made about it had been ignored. So I wrote the email. I addressed it to my former supervisor, the office manager, and the regional director, the usual trio who had ignored me before. But this time, I added 2 more recipients in the blind copy, the big boss from the central office and her even bigger boss. Networking and politeness, I practice them religiously. They pay off when it counts. I asked very respectfully when I would finally receive the mandatory training I had been promised months ago. I explained that I had been handling cases without the required certification and would have to continue doing so until my responsibilities were reassigned. 2 minutes later, I received a reply from the highest-ranking official in the entire state agency.
She expressed that she was saddened and disturbed to hear about my situation and promised she would personally ensure I completed the required training. She was also shocked that I had essentially been forced to accept a demotion just to keep my job. As a result, she guaranteed that under no circumstances would my salary be reduced. The most amusing part? I was being trained for a position I no longer held, so the whole exercise was absurd in itself. On top of that, the standard training sessions weren't even being offered at that time. This meant I had to travel to the state capitol for a special session, just me and a handful of other lucky employees from across the state. Since the capitol was far from home, company policy required that they provide a hotel room and a reasonable per diem. Thanks to some late-night research, I discovered that the city was hosting major events at the same time. I reported this to the big boss from the central office, explaining that no reasonably priced rooms were available near the training site. That would have been a contract violation on their part. Now it was their responsibility to find accommodation for me. In the end, the big boss exercised her authority and booked me a luxury suite in a stunning hotel, a pinnacle of cosmopolitan glamour, at least by local standards. The following week, I went to the week-long training. Let me remind you, this was for a job I no longer held and had no intention of ever doing again. My motivation, naturally, was minimal. The entire week, I did nothing but enjoy the luxury suite, expensive meals, and a couple of fun events in the city. In effect, I received a fully paid week off, even though I technically no longer had benefits. Returning to the office, I noticed that 2 coworkers from my department had quit, along with several others across the office. Chaos reigned largely because my letter from 2 weeks earlier had finally reached the central big boss. She had dug in, realized how badly our office was running, and acted swiftly and ruthlessly. She dropped the full weight of bureaucratic authority, and the office felt it. Thanks to my new contract status, I was required to do only what was explicitly stated in it. Due to office incompetence, I could complete all my assigned tasks in about 20 hours a week. Plus, with the chaos caused by coworkers being sent to training, I was often tasked with simply transporting items from one location to another, sometimes across the state. I was slightly annoyed that this distracted me from core duties, but of course I was willing to sacrifice myself for the agency.
It allowed me to easily rack up hours, sometimes working 16-hour days doing almost nothing and getting paid for the mileage. I would sit at my desk, headphones on, quietly watching the world burn around me. My office life until my departure was simple: handle minor tasks, then do absolutely nothing, browse the internet, watch YouTube, etc., until I reached 40 hours for the week. Often I could leave for the weekend by Wednesday afternoon or Thursday morning. My life had shifted from a nightmare to a balanced existence. I began enjoying life again, spending time with my girlfriend, playing video games, and pursuing hobbies. I even used accumulated overtime to pay for a Caribbean cruise in November, which I was thrilled about because many childhood friends were going. My once formidable, now comparatively humble boss quietly wished me a good vacation and expressed hope I'd return. I joked that I couldn't promise anything. I enjoyed a week in warm waters and on the islands, experienced the pleasure of cruising like a pro, and reflected on what I wanted from life, work, and myself. Back at the office on Monday, I waited for my boss. When she entered, she already knew what I would say. I could see the joy drain from her face, leaving only a hollow shell. I informed her that, unfortunately, I couldn't stay until the end of December. I needed to leave 2 weeks early due to unforeseen complications in my transition to the MBA program. She replied with a weary, strained tone, "I understand. Thank you for your 6 months of service. I'm sorry to see you go." And that's how I turned a demotion into a fully paid week off and nearly 4 months of easy work. Moreover, I turned her words against her, becoming the model ethical employee, strictly following my contract while creating office chaos for weeks as management scrambled to handle the attention from the central leadership. Recently, I discussed this story with my current girlfriend, whom I met at that very agency. She's amazing and makes me happier than I've ever been. I'm fairly certain I'll propose eventually. She mentioned that both my previous bosses, as well as the office manager and regional director, were eventually removed from their positions, enforced by the central big boss shortly after my departure. For those curious, I completed my MBA program with a perfect GPA, 4.0. Next week, I have an interview for a new position. Looks like I'll nearly double my income again.
My ex-wife is trying to win me back by using our daughters. Doesn't sound too serious at first, right? Yeah, it's what I thought too. But as much as I'd love to tell my ex to go to hell and never see her again, we share 2 daughters and joint custody. So completely cutting her out of my life just isn't possible, not unless I walk away from my kids too, which I'd never do. We got married young, 20 years old, dating for 3 years before that. Our daughters were born during the first year of marriage. After the second birth, my ex had complications that made it difficult for her to get pregnant again. I didn't care. I was just grateful she made it through safely, and that we already had 2 beautiful little girls to love. The marriage lasted 9 years. It ended when I filed for divorce after discovering she cheated. I have 0 tolerance for betrayal. I refuse to make myself miserable for something I didn't cause. Maybe it sounds strange, but my love for her died the exact moment I learned about her affair in detail. So no, this isn't some story about a man who can't let go. I moved on 7 years ago. Hell, I don't even hate her. I just don't care. Whatever happens in her life means nothing to me, unless it directly affects our kids. The problem is, I seem to be the only one who's actually moved on. My ex, her family, and even our daughters keep trying to push us back together, even though I've made it crystal clear that I have absolutely no desire to ever be with her again. Maybe the fact that I stayed single for years after the divorce gave them false hope, but honestly, I just wasn't ready to jump into anything new. My daughters were my top priority. Plus, I had my own emotional mess to sort through after her betrayal, which, thankfully, I managed with help from friends, family, and therapy. My relationship with my daughters is great. We don't fight, we don't yell, and they're not rebellious or dramatic. Everything's been peaceful, except for one issue. They know their mother cheated. She told them herself about 3 years ago. Since then, I think she's been feeding them her version of events. I've asked her countless times to stop,
It doesn't help anyone, least of all the girls. But instead of stopping, she just got sneakier about it. Since the divorce, she hasn't dated anyone, or even tried. I guess she thinks that makes her look noble. But honestly, I find it insulting. She could cheat on me while we were married, but now she's suddenly living like a saint? Whatever. That's her problem, not mine. For years, I could ignore the little comments my daughters made about their mom. How good she looks now, how happy she seems, the photos she just happened to show them where she's clearly dressed up to impress. But lately, things have gotten worse. Why? Because I started seeing someone. Clemence isn't the first woman I've dated since the divorce, but this is by far the most serious relationship I've had since it ended. She's 8 years older than me. We actually knew each other for about 4 years before anything romantic happened. We shared a hobby, became close friends, and eventually realized there was more between us. And yes, I genuinely love her. It even surprised me when I realized it. I honestly thought my ex's betrayal had broken something inside me, that I'd never be able to love again the way I once did. At first, my daughters didn't know much about Clemence. Just like my previous relationships, I kept things private. But eventually, they started coming home earlier than expected and began seeing her around. Nothing inappropriate ever happened, but soon came the sighs, the cold looks, and the questions. What is she doing here? Don't you think it's unfair to Mom? It was like they thought I was dating just to spite their mother. I sat them down for a serious talk, explained everything over and over, but it just didn't sink in. They're still clinging to some childish fantasy where their parents get back together. Clemence, thankfully, is incredibly understanding. She doesn't take it personally and keeps saying, give them time. But honestly, I'm not convinced time will fix this. It hasn't yet, so why would it now? I've run out of ideas. That's why I'm asking for advice. Is there any way, any possible approach to help my daughters finally understand that I will never get back with their mother?
Sounds harmless enough, right? Well, not really. As much as I'd love to tell my ex to get lost and never see her again, we share 2 daughters and have joint custody. So, cutting her out of my life completely isn't an option, unless I'm willing to lose my kids too. We got married young, both 20, after dating for 3 years. Our twin girls were born during the first year of marriage. My ex had some complications after that, which made future pregnancies difficult. At the time, I didn't care about that at all. I was just grateful she survived everything safely, and that we already had 2 beautiful little girls we adored. Our marriage lasted 9 years. It ended when I filed for divorce after discovering she had cheated. I have zero tolerance for that kind of betrayal, and saw no reason to keep suffering for something that wasn't my fault. Some might find it strange, but every ounce of love I had for her died the moment I learned the full story of her affair. So no, this isn't some sad tale about a man who can't move on. I did, 7 years ago. Hell, I don't even hate her anymore. I just couldn't care less what happens in her life as long as it doesn't affect our daughters. The real problem is that I'm the only one who truly moved on. My ex, her family, and even our daughters keep trying to reunite us, despite me being very clear that I have zero interest in ever being with her again. Maybe the fact that I didn't date anyone for years after the divorce gave them false hope. But honestly, I wasn't about to jump into another relationship that fast, especially when I had 2 girls to raise. They were my priority. Eventually, with the help of friends, family, and therapy, I got my mental health back on track. My relationship with my daughters has always been great. No fights, no yelling, no teenage rebellion, yet they're smart, kind, and we've always been close. But there's one big problem. They know their mother cheated on me because she told them about 3 years ago. Since then, I'm pretty sure she's been feeding them a twisted version of events. I've asked her countless times to stop dragging them into our adult mess, but she doesn't listen. She hasn't dated anyone since the divorce, hasn't even slept with anyone apparently. She thinks that makes her look noble. Personally, I find it insulting. When we were married, she was sleeping with someone else, and now she suddenly can live without intimacy for 7 years? Whatever, that's her problem. For years, I brushed off the occasional mentions of her looks or the photos my daughter showed me where she clearly dressed up just to make an impression. But things changed after I started dating again. My girlfriend Clemence isn't my first relationship since the divorce, but she's definitely the most serious one. She's 8 years younger than me, and we'd known each other for 4 years before we started dating. It grew naturally, from friendship into something deeper. And honestly, I love her. I didn't expect that. I thought my ex's betrayal had broken something inside me, that I'd never be able to love again. Turns out I was wrong. At first, my daughters didn't know much about my relationship with Clemence. Then they started showing up at my house earlier than scheduled, sometimes finding her there. We were never inappropriate, just living our normal lives. But soon came the questions, what is she doing here? Or, that's not fair to Mom. It's like they genuinely believe I'm seeing someone just to hurt their mother. I've had long, honest talks with them, but they just don't seem to get it. They can't let go of the fantasy that their parents might reunite someday. Thankfully, Clemence is understanding. She says the girls just need time. Oh, I'm not sure that will help. It hasn't so far. So yeah, I came online looking for advice. Maybe someone out there knows how to help my daughters finally understand that no matter what happens, I'm never going back to their mother. When I try explaining that you can't be faithful to someone you're no longer with, they just ignore it. I've begged my ex countless times to stop manipulating the girls and keep them out of our adult issues, but she doesn't care. At one point, I even considered going to court to get full custody, but was advised it probably backfired. The truth is, my daughters know why we divorced. They know their mother cheated. I usually don't recommend telling kids something like that, but mine are old enough now. The problem is that their understanding of the story is based entirely on her version, filled with excuses and self-pity. A year ago, I finally tried explaining my side, only to find out she had already told them years before, when they were around 13. They know what she did, but they can't comprehend it emotionally. To them, their mother has always been loving and caring. They can't imagine her cold and distant like she was during the affair. Back then, she completely shut me out. Not just physically, but emotionally. She stopped doing little things. Morning kisses before work, random hugs, shared jokes, all gone. I realized something was off and eventually, with a close friend's help, uncovered the truth. She had been giving all that affection to someone else. I'll never forgive that. My daughters don't understand why, and honestly, I don't want them to. No child should ever have to carry that kind of pain. So when they talk about regret, forgiveness, or getting back together, I just can't relate. Where was all that love when it mattered? Update. It's been a while since my original post. A lot has changed. My daughters actually found that post by accident. I had no idea they were even on that site. One day, I came home from work and found them both in tears. They ran to me, hugged me, and begged me to forgive them. Apparently, they'd read one of my comments and learned the full extent of their mother's affair and how deeply it hurt me back then. We went through a lot of therapy together. Honestly, I never blamed them. They were just kids, manipulated by their mother, who used their love as a weapon. After a few months of family therapy, the psychologist told us we no longer needed weekly sessions, just occasional check-ins. My daughters and I became closer than ever. Their relationship with their mom, though, took a hit, understandably. I told them not to dwell on her mistakes. I've long since made peace with what she did. That's also something we worked through in therapy. I eventually had a serious talk with my ex, made it absolutely clear that the getting back together nonsense needed to stop. Whether she listened or not, I don't know, but at least she stopped bothering the girls with it. Or maybe they've learned to tune her out. Either way, as long as my daughters are okay, I don't care what she's doing. As things settled, Clemence and my daughter started bonding, really bonding. They started talking to her more, even asking her for advice on girl stuff. The first time I saw that, I nearly cried. Not long after, Clemence and the girls surprised me. They organized a private dinner, just the three of us. Then Clemence proposed to me. Yeah, she beat me to it.
I was stunned, but happier than I had been in years. Not just because of her proposal, but because my daughters helped her plan it. We had a small, intimate ceremony with close friends and family, and now we're expecting a baby. My daughters can't wait to become big sisters, and I honestly can't wait to watch them spoil their new sibling rotten.
I stopped a kidnapping while delivering pizza. I work as a pizza delivery driver, and one night turned into one of the strangest and most intense experiences of my life. It was a crazy shift, non-stop orders driving all over the city without a single real break. I had been drinking water all evening because of the heat, and of course, I didn't make time to use the restroom. By the time I got close to my next delivery, the urge hit me like a truck. Luckily, I was nearly at the customer's address. I thought I'd drop the pizza off quickly, then deal with the problem. But when I pulled up, things immediately felt wrong. I'd been to that neighborhood before, even that house, but this time all the windows were dark, not even the glow of a TV inside. The entire street was eerily quiet. This was a college area, so sure, not many students were around in July, but still, somebody had ordered this pizza. I wasn't about to step out of the car and walk up to a pitch-black house. It was around 9:30 p.m., still hot outside, even though the sun had set hours ago. My car's AC barely worked, and the pizza boxes weren't helping. I called the number on the order. At first, all I heard was heavy, uneven breathing, then a shaky, "Hello?" I tried to keep it professional. "Hey, I'm outside with your pizza, but it doesn't look like anyone's home." The voice gasped, I'm not there. Not yet." Annoyed, and very distracted by my full bladder, I snapped back harsher than I should have. "Well, if you're not here, I'll have to cancel the order. You were supposed to pay cash. Next time, plan better." Almost immediately, I regretted it. The voice grew clearer. It was a young woman, maybe in her early 20s. Out of breath, she explained, "Oh my God, I was running home. I almost didn't hear you. I just switched off my AirPods. Is this better? I lost track of time at work, but I knew you'd be coming, so I'm literally sprinting back right now. Please don't leave. I'm starving and I don't have a car. Just 5 minutes, I promise." Hearing her voice jogged my memory. I had delivered here before, and she was always polite. Now I felt like a jerk for barking at her. I told her it was fine, that I'd wait, and hung up. But the bathroom situation was reaching emergency levels. No trees, no hidden corners. And like an idiot, I had tossed out an empty bottle earlier. The only option was the row of bushes by her front walkway. No lights outside, no one around, my car parked across the street, and thankfully, my job didn't require a uniform. I figured I'd be quick and no one would notice. I hurried to the thickest bush right near the front door, unzipped, and finally started to relieve myself. But almost immediately, I realized something was off. The sound wasn't right. It wasn't hitting dirt. It was solid. Before I could process it, a muffled male voice barked, "What the hell?" And a man suddenly burst out of the bush. He ran past me, wiping himself off. I must have hit him directly. My eyes adjusted enough to make out his shape, build, and clothes, but he disappeared before I could react. A minute later, I heard the screech of tires down the street. That's when it clicked. That girl had said she was running home, alone, at night, and some guy had been hiding in her bushes by the door. If I hadn't been desperate enough to relieve myself right there, I don't even want to think what might have happened. I was so stunned that I didn't even zip up. I just stood there, frozen, trying to process what the hell had just happened. The reality of it was so terrifying that my brain refused to accept it, desperately searching for some logical explanation that would make it all seem normal. I wondered maybe the bushes led to a backyard and only looked like they were up against the house. Maybe they covered an open basement window or something. But then that voice in my head screamed, "Dude, that guy was wearing a hoodie in 90-degree Fahrenheit. That is not normal. He's bad news. You're in real danger." The thought that I'd been just a couple of steps away from some man hiding in the bushes outside a young woman's home at night sent a chill down my spine.
My fight-or-flight response completely broke down because instead of running, my dumb brain decided to do the absolute worst thing possible. I walked closer to investigate. There had to be a reasonable explanation, right? Some non-creepy reason for a guy in a hoodie to be crouched in the dark shrubs? I circled around, turned on my phone flashlight, and aimed it behind the bushes. But if something looks scary in the dark, trust me, shining a beam of light on it can make it 100 times worse. That's when I saw it. A bag. It was an old, beat-up drawstring backpack, a little damp from, well, yeah, I'd accidentally splashed it. Still in a fog of shock, I reached for it, thinking, okay, maybe this explains it. Maybe he's homeless. Maybe he was just resting here. But when I opened the bag, reality hit me like a truck. Inside were a sharp hunting knife, a roll of duct tape, and a bottle of pills. At that moment, every illusion I'd been clinging to shattered. My body flipped into full survival mode. Adrenaline and instinct kicked in like never before. Gone was the frozen, confused idiot. I became laser-focused on one single goal: get to the car. I dropped the bag like it was on fire, bolted across the street, jumped into my car, and floored it before the door had even shut. I didn't stop until I hit a red light several blocks away. Only then did I pull over in the lot of a 24-hour pharmacy, shaking uncontrollably, trying to catch my breath. When I finally calmed down enough to think clearly, the first question hit me. Do I call the cops first, or the girl who lives there? I mulled it over for what felt like 10 seconds, but when I glanced at the clock, an entire hour had passed. My brain was still scrambled. Eventually, I told myself, all right, I'm safe in my locked car with the engine running. If anything goes down, I can drive away. But she might not know what's waiting for her. So I started dialing her number. Then a horrifying thought stopped me cold. What if there is no girl? Sure, I was 90% sure I'd delivered here before, but what if I was mistaken? What if the girl on the phone was just bait, a setup to lure me into a trap? Every pizza delivery driver alive has heard of the evil genius case. I replayed the phone call in my head. She'd been panting, said she wasn't home, begged me not to leave. The whole thing was weird, way too weird. Nope, can't risk it. Call the cops first. So I dialed 911. The operator was calm, professional, thank God, because by then I was completely falling apart. I kept rambling, tripping over my words, trying to explain 3 different points at once. You have to get there before the girl arrives. He wasn't waiting for me, he was waiting for her. But then again, maybe she doesn't even exist. But I did talk to someone on the phone, so if she is real, you need to find her because she has no idea what's happening. And listen, I only checked part of the bushes. There could be more than one of them. Oh, and you'll know the guy when you see him because, I peed all over him. Not on purpose, just... Long story. Finally, the dispatcher told me to stop talking and just stay on the line. And then, her number popped up on my phone. Incoming call. I couldn't answer without disconnecting 911, so I ignored it. Seconds later, a text came through. Hey, I'm here, but I don't see you. I blurted it out to the operator, and they said the officers were just a couple of minutes away from the address. But my stomach twisted with guilt. Rationally, I knew the odds of her being some kind of scammer were tiny. Much more likely, she was a real girl walking straight into a nightmare. I unmuted the line and said, I'm going back. I can't just sit here. They definitely didn't like that answer, but I had already turned the car around. My heart was pounding out of my chest, and the whole way I was muttering under my breath, shh, fuck, fuck, fuck. And then I saw her.